In the quiet of a mansion that could buy silence itself, a billionaire lies on a leather couch pretending to sleep. Just a few feet away, the door of his office safe gapes open, its steel mouth revealing stacks of cash. It isn't a mistake. It's a test. Elias Monroe, brilliant, admired, and quietly lonely, has grown certain that honesty is a myth sold to the poor. So tonight, he decides to prove himself right. He's not waiting for thieves from the outside. He's waiting for temptation from within. But when his black maid's little girl walks into the room and sees that safe, what happens next will silence the arrogance of wealth and expose the kindness that still breathes in small hearts. If you believe honesty should never depend on who's watching, tap like to help this message travel. Morning sunlight slipped through tall glass panels, spilling across the marble floor of Monroe Estate. The house had that strange perfection of places too rich for fingerprints, polished, still, and faintly cold. Elias Monroe sat in his office, head leaning back, eyes half closed. To anyone looking in, he seemed to be dozing off after another long night of empire building. But beneath that calm exterior, his mind was awake, sharp, calculating. He had left the safe open on purpose. A thick bundle of $100 bills sat right at the edge, where the light could catch their green shimmer. Downstairs, Amara Hill and her 8-year-old daughter Lila were already at work. The mother folded sheets with careful precision. The daughter dusted bookshelves with a feather brush almost too big for her hands. They worked in rhythm, like a small orchestra of effort and grace. "Remember, Lila," Amara whispered, handing her a soft cloth. "Clean what you see, but also what others miss." Lila grinned. "Like corners?" "Like corners and like hearts," Amara said, smiling gently. "That's where dust hides the longest." The girl nodded solemnly, then wandered toward the office hallway, humming a tune she made up herself. Inside, Elias heard her small footsteps approach. He resisted the urge to open his eyes. Instead, he slowed his breathing, pretending to sleep more deeply. The door creaked. Lila froze. Her brown eyes widened at the sight of the open safe, its contents glowing under the morning light. The room smelled faintly of cedar and paper, a scent she had learned meant important things. "Mama," she called softly. "Mr. Monroe forgot to close his box." Amara entered a moment later, wiping her hands on her apron. When she saw the open safe, her breath caught for an instant. Any adult would feel it, the pull of curiosity, the quiet panic of what-ifs. Elias, from behind his closed lids, felt the silence stretch. Would she take even one step closer? Would the mother look at the cash and wonder what it could buy? But Amara didn't move toward the money. She moved toward her daughter. "Lila," she said, gently, "we don't touch things that aren't ours." "I know," the girl answered. "I was just gonna close it." Elias's pulse quickened. He heard the faint click of metal as the small hand turned the handle and shut the safe's heavy door. Then came a sound he did not expect. Amara's voice, low, calm, and full of something that sounded like prayer. "Doing right isn't about being seen," she murmured. "It's about being safe with yourself." Lila tilted her head. "Safe with myself?" "Yes, baby. That means you can look at your own reflection and not have to look away." Elias opened his eyes just a sliver. He saw them both framed by the morning light, mother and daughter standing before the locked safe as if before a shrine. There was no hesitation in them, no hunger, only decency made visible. Something inside him shifted quietly, like a door unlatching. He had built companies, bought patents, and measured worth in numbers. But that simple act, a child shutting temptation closed, felt larger than any empire he owned. Amara noticed him stirring and quickly stepped back. "Oh, Mr. Monroe, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Elias sat up slowly. "No need to apologize," he said, voice still heavy with false sleep. "I must have dozed off." Lila smiled. "You forgot your safe open, sir, but I closed it for you." Elias blinked, momentarily disarmed by the child's tone, so ordinary, so innocent. It erased any trace of manipulation from the air. "Thank you, Lila," he said softly. She nodded and left the room, skipping, her braids bouncing. When they were gone, he looked at the closed safe, then at his own reflection in the glass wall. For years, he'd told himself integrity was a performance, that people behaved only when they were watched. But that little girl hadn't known she was being tested. She had simply done what was right. The quiet hit him differently this time. It wasn't the silence of superiority, it was the silence of shame and awakening. That evening, after Amara and Lila had gone home, Elias called his HR department. "Adjust her salary," he said. "To how much, sir?" "Enough that she can breathe." He paused, then added, "And make sure it's anonymous. I don't want her thanking me. I want to thank her." When the call ended, he sat back and stared into the shadows. The test he'd designed to prove greed had failed, but in failing, it had proven something else, something far rarer. Marcus Shaw would later tell him, "You found gold, Elias, just not the kind you can deposit." And Elias would agree, though he didn't know yet how far that gold would reach. For now, he only knew this. The richest man in the room had just been taught what wealth really meant, by a woman with calloused hands and a child who still believed in right and wrong. The morning after the test, the house seemed different. Not because anything had changed, but because Elias had. He woke earlier than usual, not to check his portfolio or his overseas accounts, but to re-watch the security feed he had set up in his office. On the screen, he saw exactly what he had witnessed with his own eyes. A little girl closing a safe that wasn't hers, while her mother stood behind her with quiet grace. It played like a lesson disguised as a moment. Each time Lila's small fingers turned the handle, something inside Elias's chest tightened, as though guilt had decided to take a seat beside him. He had once prided himself on understanding people. He could predict market movements, buy out competitors, even sense when a deal would fall apart. But he had lost the ability to read something simpler, the decency of a good person. For years, he had treated kindness as currency, trust as a liability. Now, he wasn't so sure. Downstairs, Amara Hill was folding freshly laundered linens in the sunlit laundry room. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, and the smell of clean cotton filled the air. The sound of the washing machine was steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the background. Lila, sitting on a stool nearby, hummed while writing in a small notebook that looked too worn for its age. She wasn't writing words, exactly. She was drawing. On one page, she had sketched a big rectangle and labeled it Truth Box. "What's that, baby?" Amara asked, watching the pencil move in small circles. "It's the safe," Lila said, eyes bright. "Only this one's invisible. When people open it, they have to choose what to put inside. Money or honesty." Amara stopped folding for a second, touched by her daughter's imagination. "And what would you put in, Lila?" The girl smiled shyly. "You already did, Mama. You always do." Amara looked away before her eyes could fill. That simple statement felt heavier than anything the mansion's walls could hold. She remembered her own mother, a woman who'd worked 3 jobs and still came home humming gospel songs. "Don't count what you earn, child," her mother used to say. "Count what you keep in your heart." It had been decades, but the lesson remained alive through her, alive now in Lila. Upstairs, Elias left his office and walked toward the balcony overlooking the gardens. The morning air carried the faint smell of rosemary and rain. From this height, the world looked obedient, small. He spotted Amara in the courtyard below, hanging sheets on a wooden rack, while Lila chased a butterfly. The child laughed freely, a sound so pure it made the walls of that grand estate feel almost human again. Elias caught himself smiling. Then something in him recoiled at the thought. When was the last time he'd smiled at something that wasn't profitable? His phone buzzed. The caller ID read Marcus Shaw. "Morning," Elias said. "Morning, boss," Marcus replied, his voice warm but grounded. "How's the grand experiment?" Elias sighed. "It backfired." "Good. Maybe that's the point." Elias chuckled, but it came out quiet. "She didn't even hesitate, Marcus. She saw the safe and told her daughter to close it. It was like she'd been teaching that lesson all her life." "She probably has," Marcus said. "That kind of integrity doesn't come from books. It's built in kitchens and bus stops and late nights when the bills don't match the paycheck." Elias leaned on the balcony rail, watching Lila spin in the sunlight. "I keep thinking, why did I need proof at all?" Marcus answered softly. "Because wealth makes people forget the language of trust. You've been listening to the wrong voices for too long." The words landed gently, but they stung. Elias had surrounded himself with people who nodded, not questioned, who measured loyalty and profit margins. Marcus was one of the few who still spoke to him like a man, not a monument. When Amara and Lila came inside for lunch, the smell of roasted vegetables and bread filled the kitchen. Elias found an excuse to pass through, pretending to look for something in the fridge. Lila waved cheerfully. "Good afternoon, Mr. Monroe." He smiled, genuinely this time. "Good afternoon, Lila. Did you finish your art?" "Yes, sir. I made a drawing of your safe." "Oh?" he asked, pretending surprise. "And what did you keep in it?" She tilted her head. "Nothing. I think it's already full." Amara looked nervous. "Lila," but Elias raised a hand. "It's all right." He looked at the little girl and said softly, "You might be right." He turned to Amara. "Could we speak later, when you finish your shift?" "Of course, sir." When they met that evening, Elias thanked her for her honesty and handed her an envelope. Amara hesitated to take it. "It's not charity," he said, sensing her hesitation. "It's recognition." Inside was a letter notifying her of a pay increase and full medical coverage for her daughter. Her hands trembled slightly as she read it. "Sir, this is too much." "No," Elias replied. "It's just enough." She tried to speak, but he stopped her with a raised hand. "You don't owe me thanks. You already paid me back," in a language I had forgotten. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Gentle, not awkward. It was the kind of silence that feels safe. That night, as Elias walked through the dark corridors of his home, he passed the now locked safe. The steel looked dull in the moonlight. He realized he didn't care what was inside anymore. For the first time in years, he didn't double-check the locks or glance at the security cameras before bed. Instead, he sat by the window and thought about a mother teaching her daughter to close not just safes, but temptations. He wondered how many lessons like that he had missed, because he was too busy proving he couldn't be fooled. Outside, the garden lights flickered softly. In one of the guest houses at the far edge of the estate, Amara and Lila slept peacefully. The world was quiet, honest, and for a man who had built an empire from doubt, that quiet felt like faith. The next morning began with rain. Not the heavy kind that punished the ground, but a soft drizzle that seemed to wash the city in forgiveness. The windows of the Monroe estate were misted with thin streaks of water, and every sound in the house felt quieter than usual, as if even the walls were listening. Elias Monroe stood by his study window, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. The garden below shimmered in gray light. He could see the narrow path where Amara Hill usually walked, with a basket of laundry balanced on her hip, her daughter Lila skipping beside her. For the first time in years, Elias noticed the small details, the rhythm of their footsteps, the easy laughter that drifted upward, the ordinary warmth that had nothing to do with wealth. He realized he had spent a lifetime surrounded by perfection. Polished floors, designer art, immaculate lawns. But none of it had ever felt alive until now. He picked up his phone and called Marcus Shaw. "Morning," Marcus said, his voice carrying the calm of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "I can't stop thinking about that little girl," Elias admitted. "She closed the safe like it was the most natural thing in the world. No hesitation, no greed, just trust." Marcus chuckled softly. "You sound like a man discovering gravity for the first time." Elias smiled despite himself. "I suppose I do. Maybe I've lived so long above the clouds that I forgot what the ground feels like." "You always measured people in numbers," Marcus said. "Net worth, profit margins, credit scores. But sometimes the richest thing in the room doesn't have a price tag." Elias turned from the window. "I want to help them, Marcus, but not the way rich people usually help, throwing money at problems. I want to understand what made that child so fearless." "Start by listening," Marcus replied. "And for once, don't talk like a man used to giving orders." Elias nodded slowly. "That might be harder than you think." Down in the servants' quarters, Amara and Lila were finishing breakfast, oatmeal and a few slices of apple. The room was small but bright, filled with the kind of warmth that money couldn't buy. Lila was telling a story about a stray kitten she had seen near the gate, her hands fluttering in excitement. "You think he's hungry?" she asked. "Most things that wander alone are," Amara said softly. Lila tilted her head. "Were we hungry once?" Amara smiled faintly. "In many ways, yes. But we learned how to feed ourselves. With hope, not bread." The child considered that, her brow furrowed in the serious way children sometimes think. "So hope fills the stomach?" "Not quite," Amara said, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "It fills the soul, and when the soul isn't starving, the body can keep going." That afternoon, Elias asked Amara to join him briefly in the study. She walked in hesitantly, wiping her hands on her apron. The rain had stopped, leaving a scent of wet soil drifting through the open balcony door. "Please have a seat," Elias said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his desk. She sat, back straight, polite but cautious. Years of working for wealthy families had taught her that kindness from the rich often came with invisible strings. Elias studied her for a moment. "Amara, I owe you an apology." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "Sir, I tested you," he confessed quietly. "The open safe, it wasn't an accident. I wanted to see what you would do." Amara's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. "I told myself it was about security," Elias continued. "But the truth is, it was about pride. I wanted proof that no one was better than my cynicism. Still, Amara remained silent. I was wrong, he said finally, and I'm sorry. Amara took a slow breath. Sir, I don't know what to say. Maybe you don't have to say anything, Elias replied. Your daughter already did. That broke the tension. Her expression softened. Lila? He nodded. She reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That honesty isn't something you buy or teach with lectures. It's something children learn when they see it every day. You've given her that gift. Amara lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the praise. I just want her to be safe in this world, Mr. Monroe. Elias smiled gently. Then you've already succeeded where most of us fail. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, a few raindrops fell from the roof, hitting the stone steps with quiet rhythm. The house no longer felt cold. It felt lived in. That evening, when Amara and Lila returned to their small apartment in the staff quarters, the girl pulled out her sketchbook again. She drew a picture of the safe, this time with a heart inside it instead of money. Look, Mama, she said proudly. I changed what goes in the box. Amara smiled. That's beautiful, baby. Lila's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you think Mr. Monroe keeps hearts in his box too? Amara laughed softly. Not yet, but maybe one day. Meanwhile, in his private study, Elias poured himself a glass of water and sat by the fireplace. He thought about that child's drawing, though he didn't know it existed. He thought about safes that held money and hearts that stayed locked for years. He remembered Marcus's words, "Start by listening." So he did. He listened to the rain, to the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock, to the faint echoes of laughter somewhere in the halls. Each sound reminded him that his house, so often a fortress, could also be a home. He opened his laptop and began to type a message to Marcus. You were right. I met two people who understand wealth better than I ever did. He hesitated, then added another line. I think I'd like to learn from them. He closed the laptop and leaned back, letting the warmth of the fire settle into his bones. Outside, the storm had passed. In the small quarters at the edge of the estate, Lila's voice drifted through the night as she fell asleep. Doing right isn't about being seen, Mama. It's about being safe with yourself. Amara kissed her forehead. That's right, baby. Always. The world outside was still. The air smelled of clean rain and new beginnings. And somewhere in the great, echoing mansion, a billionaire closed his eyes, no longer pretending to sleep. By the end of that week, the calm that had briefly settled over Monroe Industries began to ripple. Not in the quiet halls of Elias's mansion, but in the steel and glass tower that bore his name. On the 43rd floor, beneath a ceiling of polished chrome and ambition, Gregory Kane was reading a financial memo when he noticed something that made his jaw tighten. The document listed revised payroll figures for select domestic staff, including one name he didn't recognize, Amara Hill. Next to it, an increase, not small, significant. Gregory leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under the weight of his irritation. He was tall, sharp-featured, and always dressed as though preparing to attend his own celebration. People said he could sell a promise before he believed it himself. That was his talent, and his poison. He pressed the intercom button. Elaine, he said, his tone smooth but cutting. Come in for a moment. Elaine Foster, head of human resources, appeared at the door a minute later. Her expression was the kind of polite blankness that comes from years of survival in corporate politics. Yes, Mr. Kane. Gregory twirled his pen between two fingers. Why? He asked slowly. Is a housemaid being paid almost double the standard rate? And why is her health coverage marked premium? Is she suddenly running the company? Elaine hesitated. That adjustment came directly from Mr. Monroe. Gregory's smile was tight, the kind that never reached the eyes. I see. And what, may I ask, did this Amara Hill do to earn such generosity? Elaine's voice dropped. Sir, I don't know the details. Mr. Monroe requested it himself. Of course he did, Gregory said, his tone light but poisoned. He always had a soft spot for lost causes. Elaine said nothing. She had learned that silence was safer than sense. Later that afternoon, Gregory met with a group of junior executives. They were discussing quarterly performance reports, but his attention drifted. He thought about Elias, the founder who had built everything from scratch, and the subtle distance that had formed between them. For years, Gregory had stood in Elias's shadow, pretending it was sunlight. He wanted more than money. He wanted control. And now, a single line in a payroll ledger had reignited a dangerous idea that Elias was slipping, distracted, too sentimental to lead. When the meeting ended, Gregory stopped at the window overlooking the city. The skyline stretched like a promise he hadn't yet kept. His reflection stared back at him, handsome, successful, and quietly seething. That evening, the staff at the Monroe estate gathered for their weekly review. It was mostly routine: inventory counts, maintenance schedules, a few notes about upcoming events. But for Amara Hill, the atmosphere felt different. Whispers followed her, though no one spoke loudly enough to be heard. She could sense it, the subtle shift that happens when respect begins to sour into resentment. After the meeting, as she walked toward the service gate, she noticed Gregory Kane's black car parked near the fountain. He stepped out, umbrella in hand, looking too polished for rain. Ms. Hill, he said pleasantly, a moment of your time? She froze, unsure why a man of his rank would need to speak with her. Yes, sir. I've been reviewing payroll changes, he began, his tone casual, almost friendly. Imagine my surprise when I found your name near the top of the adjustment list. Amara's heartbeat quickened. I wasn't aware of any details, sir. Oh, I'm sure you weren't, Gregory said, his smile deepening like a blade. Mr. Monroe can be generous when he's inspired. You must have made quite the impression. She stiffened. With respect, sir, I do my job, nothing more. That must be one exceptional job, he replied, taking a step closer. Perhaps you could share your secret. Some of us could use a little of that magic. His words dripped with suggestion, not curiosity. Amara met his gaze steadily. My only secret is that I work hard and sleep well, Mr. Kane. You should try it. For a moment, the mask slipped. His smile cracked, revealing the irritation beneath. He took a half step back and said lightly, I see the maid has a tongue. Then, in a voice colder than the rain around them, he added, Careful, Ms. Hill. Favor can fade faster than fortune. He walked away before she could respond, leaving the echo of his words hanging in the damp air. Later that night, Elias found Amara in the main hall, folding linen napkins. He noticed the tension in her shoulders, the silence heavy between movements. Everything all right? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. Just a long day. Elias studied her for a moment. He could tell something had happened, but sensed she wouldn't speak of it. The line between employer and protector was still fragile, and he didn't want to break it by pushing too soon. He changed the subject instead. Lila told me she saw a kitten near the gate. That drew a small smile. She's already named it Whiskers. Of course she has, he said warmly. Tell her I'll make sure the guards leave a bowl of milk for it. Her eyes softened. Thank you, sir. As Elias walked away, he caught his reflection in one of the tall mirrors. A man trying to rebuild something he didn't yet understand. He felt both proud and uneasy, as though doing good had suddenly made him visible to those who wished him harm. Meanwhile, Gregory sat in his downtown penthouse, nursing a drink as thunder rolled across the city. His mother, Victoria Kane, called just as he was pouring a second glass. "Gregory," she said in that familiar tone that was half command, half affection. "I heard from someone at the board that Elias is wasting company money on a servant." Gregory smirked. News travels fast. "You can't let that continue," she insisted. "Our family name is tied to that company. People will think he's lost control." "I know," Gregory said softly. "But don't worry. I have a plan." "Good," she replied. "Remember, dear, in our world, perception is reality. Make sure people see the right one." When the call ended, Gregory leaned back and stared out at the lightning slicing across the sky. He didn't just want perception, he wanted proof. Proof that Elias was weak, that the maid wasn't the saint everyone thought, that the empire could belong to him instead. The storm outside grew louder, echoing the one forming quietly inside him. The next few days passed in quiet unease. From the outside, everything at Monroe Industries appeared perfectly normal. Meetings ran on schedule, emails carried their polite formalities, and quarterly goals ticked upward on every chart. But beneath the polished surface, a whisper had begun to circulate. Someone, somewhere, had started a story. That a certain maid in Elias Monroe's estate was getting special treatment. That perhaps she had found a way to charm her way into favor. And like all rumors, it didn't need proof to survive. Just envy and repetition. By Monday, the story had reached nearly every corner of the company. Inside the executive lounge, Gregory Kane poured himself a cup of coffee while two assistants chatted near the counter. Their voices were low, but just loud enough. "I heard she's not even qualified for the raise," one whispered. "Who, the maid?" "Yes. Some say she has Mr. Monroe wrapped around her finger." Gregory didn't turn toward them, but a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He didn't need to plant the rumor anymore. It had begun to bloom all on its own. When he entered the boardroom, he carried himself like a man with news that mattered. "Gentlemen," he said casually as he sat, "has anyone noticed how generous Elias has been lately?" The others exchanged uncertain glances. "He gave a domestic employee a pay increase larger than most of our managers. Receive medical coverage, bonuses, the works." Gregory stirred his coffee slowly. "And before anyone asks, no, it wasn't approved through HR." One of the senior board members frowned. "That seems unusual." "Unusual," Gregory repeated, letting the word hang like smoke. "Yes, and reckless." He leaned back, satisfied. He knew exactly what he was doing. Not accusing outright, just enough to invite doubt. At the estate, Amara Hill could feel the shift. The smiles from other staff members were thinner now, the greetings shorter. Conversations ended when she entered a room. She told herself it didn't matter, that her work spoke for itself. But even the strongest spirit can bruise under constant scrutiny. On Wednesday, as she dusted the staircase rail, Gregory's car pulled up once again. She stiffened instantly. He wasn't supposed to appear this often. He stepped out, greeting the guards with exaggerated politeness. "Just here to check on security protocols," he announced, though no one had called him. When he reached the hall, he found Amara arranging flowers. "Ah, Ms. Hill," he said lightly. "Still keeping the place beautiful, I see." "Just doing my job, sir," she replied, eyes down. He circled the arrangement, pretending to inspect the roses. "Such dedication. No wonder Mr. Monroe appreciates you." Amara froze, unsure how to respond. He continued softly. "You must understand, though, that not everyone sees things the same way. Some people think, well, let's just say, they question your intentions." "My intentions?" Her voice was quiet but steady. "Yes. Appearances can be dangerous, Miss Hill. People might get the wrong idea about your closeness to your employer." Her hands tightened on the vase. "There is no closeness, Mr. Kane. I work here because I need to. Nothing more." "Of course," he said smoothly. "But perception is everything. Perhaps you should be careful, for your daughter's sake." The threat was soft, but unmistakable. He left without waiting for a reply, leaving the faint scent of his cologne and arrogance behind. That night, Amara tried to hide her worry as she tucked Lila into bed. "Are you okay, Mama?" the girl asked, her small hand brushing Amara's arm. "I'm fine, baby. Just tired." Lila frowned. "You look like when Grandma used to say her heart was tired." Amara smiled gently. "Maybe my heart is just working too hard, but it'll rest soon." Lila nodded, unconvinced. "Can we say our verse?" "Of course." Together, they whispered the words Amara had learned from her own mother, an old prayer for dignity. "Let truth be my breath, and kindness my strength. Let me walk clean through the world, even when the world is not clean to me." When Lila drifted off to sleep, Amara sat by the window, staring out at the faint glow from the mansion's upper floors. Somewhere up there, Elias was probably reading reports or falling asleep at his desk. She didn't know that he, too, felt something unsettling, the quiet sense that peace was being replaced by poison. The next morning, Elias arrived at headquarters for a brief meeting. As he walked through the hallway, conversations faltered. It wasn't loud enough to be obvious, but he could feel it, the strange hush that follows gossip. Marcus Shaw met him outside the conference room. "You notice it too?" Elias nodded. "Yes, something's spreading." "Gregory's behind it," Marcus said quietly. "I've been watching him. He's setting you up for something." Elias frowned. "You think this is about Amara?" "I think it's about you," Marcus replied. "She's just the lever he's using." The realization hit Elias like cold water. "He's trying to provoke me into a mistake." "Exactly," Marcus said. "So don't give him one." Elias straightened his tie, exhaling slowly. "Then it's time I reminded Mr. Kane who actually built this company." But Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. Let him think you're still blind. If we confront him too soon, he'll hide his trail. Let him make the next move and record it." Elias hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. But make sure Amara's safe." "I already have a plan for that," Marcus said, his tone measured. That evening, when Elias returned home, he found Amara polishing silverware at the dining table. The faint tremor in her hands did not escape his notice. "Has Mr. Kane said anything inappropriate to you?" he asked carefully. She froze, unsure how to answer. "He's been speaking to me, sir, in ways that make me uncomfortable." Elias's expression darkened. "Did he threaten you?" "No," she said quickly. "But he wants me to feel small. I think that's his way of control." Elias exhaled slowly, his anger tightening into resolve. "Thank you for telling me. I'll take care of it." As he walked away, she whispered after him, "Please, sir, just don't let him hurt anyone else." He paused in the doorway. He already has. He just doesn't know it yet. That night, Marcus sent Elias a text message. "We'll start recording tomorrow. Let the storm come. We'll meet it head on." Elias stared at the screen for a long moment before replying, "Then let's bring the light." Outside, the city slept under a blanket of quiet thunderclouds. Inside, a plan was forming. Steady, patient, and sharp enough to cut through deceit. And somewhere in the guest house, Amara whispered another prayer. That truth, once revealed, would finally protect the innocent. Morning arrived heavy and gray, as if the clouds themselves were holding their breath. At Monroe Industries, employees moved through the glass corridors with the kind of careful politeness that hides fear. No one said Gregory Kane's name aloud, but everyone knew he had become the invisible wind shaping the direction of every rumor. In the elevator, Elias Monroe stood beside his longtime friend Marcus Shaw, both silent as the doors closed. The mirrored walls reflected two very different men, one in a tailored suit, one in a worn leather jacket, but they shared the same expression: quiet readiness. Marcus broke the silence first. "You sure you want to play it this way?" Elias nodded. "If we react too soon, he'll vanish before we have proof. He's clever, but not careful." "That's a dangerous kind," Marcus replied. "I know," Elias said softly. "That's why you're here." They stepped out on the executive floor. The carpet was thick, the lighting warm, but the air carried tension like static before a storm. Meanwhile, Gregory Kane was already in motion. He walked through the office like a man rehearsing power. Every step was a performance, every smile a strategy. He stopped by the security desk, tapping his pen on the counter. "We'll need temporary access to the estate cameras," he told the guard. "Routine audit." The guard hesitated. "Sir, that requires direct clearance from Mr. Monroe." Gregory smiled. "And you're looking at his number 2. I'll handle the paperwork." He left before the man could protest. The key card he'd requested gave him a 2-hour window, long enough for what he intended. Back in his car, parked underground, he called his mother. "Mother," he said smoothly, "you'll be pleased to know that our dear Elias is about to learn the cost of sentimentality." Her voice, cold and elegant, drifted through the speaker. "Be certain, Gregory. Once a reputation cracks, even money can't fix it." "Oh, I'm counting on that," he said. "By the time I'm done, the board will beg for new leadership." He ended the call, eyes flicking to the small velvet box beside him on the passenger seat. Inside it gleamed a gold Rolex, the centerpiece of his next act. That same morning, Amara Hill was finishing her duties when she noticed something odd. Gregory's car was parked near the side entrance again. She hadn't seen him come in, but she could feel his presence, the way one feels a storm before it breaks. She tried to shake it off, humming softly as she dusted the sitting room. Lila was at school, and for once the mansion was quiet. But peace never lasts when power feels threatened. Gregory appeared in the doorway. "Good morning, Ms. Hill," he said with feigned cheer. Amara turned, startled. "Mr. Kane, I didn't know you'd be visiting again." "I like to keep a close eye on company assets," he said, "including this house." She nodded politely and returned to her work. He watched her for a long moment, his gaze too deliberate to be professional. "You know," he began, "I've been thinking about what we discussed the other day, about perception. It's a dangerous thing. How people see what they want to see. I agree, Amara said quietly. He took a few steps closer. It would be such a shame if your position here were misunderstood. Rumors can ruin even the most innocent people. I have nothing to hide, she replied, still not looking at him. Perhaps not, Gregory said, lowering his voice. But innocence is fragile. All it takes is one accusation and… He snapped his fingers softly. Everything falls apart. Amara looked up then, her expression calm but firm. If you're trying to scare me, Mr. Kane, it won't work. Scare you? He smiled faintly. I'm trying to help you. I'd hate to see your daughter suffer if things changed around here. Her breath caught, but she didn't let him see the fear. Lila is off limits. Everything's connected, Ms. Hill, he said, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. Your reputation, your employment, your child's safety, they all live in the same house. Then he turned and left, his footsteps fading down the hall like a ticking clock. When Elias returned home that evening, he found Amara waiting in the foyer, her face pale. Something's wrong, she said simply. He led her to the sitting room. Tell me. She hesitated. Mr. Kane came by again. He spoke about rumors, about my daughter. He wanted me to feel afraid. Elias's hands tightened around the edge of the chair. And did he threaten you directly? Not in words, she said. But his meaning was clear. Elias nodded, his expression controlled, but his jaw set like stone. You've done nothing wrong, Amara. Don't let his poison take root. I promise you, he won't get away with this. Her eyes searched his face. Sir, I don't want trouble. You already have it, he said gently. But you're not facing it alone. He stood, took a deep breath, and said, Tomorrow, things will begin to change. That night, Marcus arrived at the estate carrying a black case filled with small recording devices. We'll keep it simple, he said, as he unpacked the tools on Elias's desk. One in the main hall, one in the office, another in the garden corridor. They'll sync automatically to a cloud drive. Elias watched, half in awe, half in regret. I never imagined needing surveillance in my own home. Marcus gave a quiet laugh. Welcome to the world you built. Money attracts shadows. He placed one of the devices under the edge of Elias's desk. You sure you're ready for what this might reveal? I need to see the truth, Elias replied. Even if it hurts. As Marcus worked, Amara peeked in, hesitant. Sir, I can leave if this is private. Elias shook his head. You stay. This concerns you too. Marcus nodded respectfully toward her. Ma'am, these will keep you safe. If Mr. Kane tries anything, we'll have evidence. She glanced at the small camera in Marcus's hand and asked softly, Will it protect my daughter too? Yes, Elias said firmly. I'll make sure of it. For the first time in days, Amara allowed herself a small breath of relief. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering leaves across the marble steps. Inside, the quiet click of a hidden recorder marked the beginning of justice in motion. When Marcus left, Elias stood alone by the window. The sky was dark, the city lights glowing faintly in the distance. He spoke aloud, not to anyone in particular, but to the house itself. She's stronger than all of us, he murmured. I just hope strength will be enough. In the guest house, Amara checked on Lila, who slept peacefully, clutching a small stuffed bear. She whispered one last prayer. Let truth speak louder than fear. And in the shadows of the estate, a different prayer took shape. Gregory Kane's whispered promise to himself. Tomorrow, the world will see who she really is. The storm was no longer coming. It had already begun. The morning began with sunlight that didn't reach the heart of the house. From the outside, the Monroe estate looked peaceful, gardens trimmed, marble gleaming. But something unseen had already taken root. A plan, polished and cruel, was unfolding behind closed doors. Gregory Kane sat in his penthouse suite with the curtains half drawn. On the table before him lay an open velvet box containing a gold Rolex, worth more than most families earned in a year. He turned the watch slowly between his fingers, studying how it caught the light. It wasn't just a watch. It was bait. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't belong to happiness, but to control. For weeks, he'd been sowing whispers through the company. Stories about favoritism, about a maid who had somehow charmed her way into privilege. Now, he was ready to turn rumor into evidence. His phone rang. The screen showed his mother's name, Victoria Kane. "Good morning, Mother," he said smoothly. "Gregory," her voice replied, crisp as glass. "I trust everything is moving along?" "As planned," he said. "By tomorrow, Elias Monroe will be the fool who trusted the wrong woman." She sighed lightly, the kind of sigh only privilege could afford. "Be careful, dear. People of our circle can't afford mistakes. Protecting reputation is like maintaining crystal. Once it cracks, it never shines the same again." Gregory chuckled. "Then I'll make sure it's her reputation that cracks, not mine." "Good boy," she said softly. "Remember, people like us must protect our circles." When the call ended, Gregory slipped the watch into his jacket pocket, its weight satisfying against his chest. At the Monroe estate, Amara Hill had just finished preparing the breakfast tray for Elias. The morning air smelled of citrus and polish, sunlight filtering through the lace curtains. Lila had left early for school, her laughter still echoing faintly in the halls. Amara's peace lasted only minutes. She heard footsteps, sharp, deliberate, coming down the corridor. Gregory's voice followed, low and commanding. "Good morning, Ms. Hill," he greeted. "I need to perform a quick inspection. We've had inventory issues in some of our corporate properties. Just routine procedure." Amara looked puzzled. "An inspection, sir? Of the guest rooms?" "Precisely," he said with a disarming smile. "You wouldn't mind if I walked through while you tidy, would you?" She hesitated, sensing something off but unwilling to defy a man in his position. "Of course not, Mr. Kane." Gregory nodded and gestured for her to lead the way. As they climbed the grand staircase, his eyes moved over the framed portraits lining the walls, paintings of wealth and lineage, the very symbols he believed gave him the right to judge others. When they reached the second-floor guest suite, Amara opened the door. The air smelled faintly of lavender and lemon wax. "I was just about to change the sheets," she said. "Perfect," Gregory replied, setting down his umbrella. "I'll be quick." He moved to the dresser, pretending to check the drawers for maintenance. When her back was turned, his hand slipped into his jacket and left the Rolex beneath a folded scarf. The motion was practiced, effortless, rehearsed. "There we are," he said lightly, stepping back. "Everything seems in order." Amara nodded politely. "Would you like me to sign any records, sir?" He smiled. "No need. I trust you." It was the kind of trust that meant the opposite. Later that afternoon, Gregory met privately with two security guards. He placed a folder on the table containing a printout of his inspection report. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I want a full sweep of the guest wing. There's been a report of missing property. You'll assist me in verifying the rooms. Keep your body cameras active." One of the guards frowned. "Sir, should we notify Mr. Monroe first?" Gregory's smile hardened. "Not yet. I don't want to disturb him over a small matter." The men exchanged uncertain glances but nodded. As they left, Gregory checked his watch. The Rolex on his wrist ticked in quiet rhythm with the one now hidden upstairs. Two identical symbols of time, one for power, one for downfall. That evening, Amara sat outside the guest house, watching the sun dip behind the hedges. The sky burned gold and pink, the color of peace pretending to last. She thought of her daughter, of the kitten they'd found near the gate, of the safety she'd begun to feel again. She didn't know that danger was already planted like a seed in the very room she had cleaned that morning. Elias passed by, on his way from the main building. "You look thoughtful," he said. "Just grateful," she replied. "For quiet days." He smiled. "They rarely stay quiet for long." She laughed softly, not realizing how prophetic those words would be. In his penthouse later that night, Gregory reviewed the footage from his car dash camera. He had positioned it earlier that day to record himself discovering the missing watch, his own little stage play ready for morning performance. He poured himself a drink and watched the city lights blur into streaks. "Tomorrow," he murmured. "The halo slips." For a brief moment, even he seemed to doubt the morality of what he was doing. But then he pictured Elias standing beside that maid, defending her, elevating her. His pride flared, and the doubt vanished. To him, this wasn't cruelty. It was correction. He was restoring order to a world that, in his mind, had tilted too far toward compassion. The glass in his hand caught the reflection of the Rolex still ticking under the scarf. It was only a matter of time. At the same moment, miles away in his quiet study, Elias was speaking to Marcus over video call. "Everything's in place," Marcus said. "If Gregory makes a move, the recorders will catch it." Elias nodded. "He'll move soon. Men like him can't hold their schemes. They need to see them unfold." Marcus leaned forward. "And when he does?" Elias's eyes hardened. "Then we let truth do what it does best." Outside, lightning flashed in the distance. Inside, the watch ticked softly beneath its folded trap, counting down to a morning that would change everything. The next morning began with a brightness that felt wrong. The sky was cloudless, the air too still, as if nature itself were holding its breath before a storm it didn't yet see. At 6:30, Amara Hill arrived at the estate with her usual calm. She greeted the gardener, straightened her apron, and went to check the guest wing. The corridor smelled faintly of polished wood and lilies from yesterday's arrangement. Everything looked ordinary. Downstairs, however, Gregory Kane was already in motion. He stood beside two uniformed guards, speaking in that crisp tone of authority that made lesser men follow. His mother, Victoria Kane, had sent him a message that morning. "Remember, appearances are everything." He intended to make sure of that. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "begin the sweep at 8 sharp. Record everything." The guards nodded. He adjusted his cufflinks and smiled at his reflection in the hallway mirror. "Let's expose an angel," he murmured. By 8 o'clock, the mansion's rhythm had begun. Maids moving between rooms, kitchen clatter echoing faintly, a radio playing somewhere in the distance. Amara was dusting picture frames when she noticed Gregory and the guards walking toward her. "Good morning, Ms. Hill," Gregory said politely, his voice carrying just loud enough for others nearby to hear. "We're conducting a quick inventory check. Some of Mr. Monroe's personal items seem to be missing." Amara blinked, confused. "Missing? From where, sir?" "The guest suite you cleaned yesterday," he said. "Would you kindly accompany us?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." As they walked, whispers followed. Two junior staff members peered around the corner, sensing drama. The air grew heavy, the kind that wraps around you before humiliation arrives. In the guest suite, sunlight spilled across the bedsheets. Gregory gestured for the guards to begin searching. Drawers opened, cabinets clicked, doors creaked. The sound was surgical, precise, merciless. Amara stood still, her hands clasped in front of her heart drumming in her ears. One of the guards paused. "Sir," he said, pointing to a drawer. "Here." Gregory moved closer, pretending surprise. Well, what's this?" He reached inside and lifted the gold Rolex, its face gleaming like an accusation. The silence that followed was absolute. "Ms. Hill," he said softly, "would you care to explain why this was found among your linens?" Amara's throat tightened. "That's not mine. I've never seen it before." "Of course not," Gregory said, voice smooth as silk. "They never are." The guards exchanged uncertain looks, still recording. Down the hallway, more employees had gathered. The scene had become theater. "Sir, I didn't," Amara began, but Gregory raised a hand to stop her. "No need to protest," he said. "The evidence speaks for itself." He turned to the guards. "Call local authorities. We'll handle this properly." Amara's vision blurred. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. For the first time in years, she couldn't find the right words. From the staircase, a small voice cried, "Mama!" It was Lila clutching her backpack. She had returned from school early after a mild fever, escorted by the driver. The child saw the crowd, the guards, and the gold watch glinting in Gregory's hand. "Mama, what happened?" she asked, her eyes wide with fear. Amara knelt down, trying to stay calm. "It's okay, baby. Everything's okay." Gregory turned to the onlookers, sighing heavily, performing disappointment for his audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it seems not everyone in this house values honesty." His words sliced through the air. A few gasps followed. Someone whispered, "I knew it." Tears welled in Lila's eyes. She wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. "Tell them it's not true," she pleaded. Amara stroked her daughter's hair, whispering, "I will, sweetheart. I will." Gregory glanced at the guard. "Is the call placed?" "Yes, sir. Dispatch confirmed." He smiled faintly. "Good. Then we'll let the authorities settle this matter." Outside, the sound of a distant siren began to grow. The crowd murmured, a mix of curiosity and judgment. For Gregory, it was the symphony of victory. Inside, Amara straightened her back. Her hands no longer shook. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Kane," she said quietly. He tilted his head. "Am I?" "Yes," she said, "because truth doesn't hide. It waits." For the first time, his smile faltered. "We'll see about that." At that very moment, in another part of the house, Marcus Shaw's phone buzzed. He was sitting in a parked car down the lane, monitoring the live feeds from the hidden cameras he'd installed days earlier. One alert blinked red. "Motion detected. Guest suite," the screen read. Marcus leaned closer. The footage showed Gregory bending toward the drawer, his hand sliding something inside before the guards arrived. The timestamp was clear, the image undeniable. He exhaled slowly. "Got you," he whispered. He called Elias immediately. "It's happening," Marcus said. "Gregory made his move." Elias's voice came calm but cold. "Then it's time to end this." Back at the mansion, the siren grew louder. Gregory stepped onto the front porch, pretending regret as the patrol car approached. "So unfortunate," he said to a nearby housekeeper. "You give people opportunities, and this is how they repay you." Inside, Amara held Lila close, whispering steady words through the tremor in her voice. "It's all right, baby. We'll stand still. The truth will come." Lila looked up, her cheeks wet. "But everyone's looking." "Then let them see," Amara said softly. "Let them see what it means to stay honest even when you're alone." The officers entered. One of them, Officer Ray Collins, recognized Amara immediately. He'd worked the estate's security rotation before. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we just need to ask a few questions." Gregory interrupted. "Officer, the watch was found in her possession. I'd prefer this handled discreetly, but theft is theft." Ray glanced at Amara, then back at Gregory. Something about the scene didn't sit right. "We'll do our job," he said carefully. As he escorted Amara toward the foyer, Lila tried to follow. A guard stopped her. "Mama!" she cried. Amara turned and smiled through tears. "I'm right here, baby. Don't be afraid." The look on her face, composed, steady, stirred something in everyone watching. Even the guards hesitated, uncertain now whether they were part of justice or cruelty. And then, just as the officers were about to leave with Amara for questioning, a voice echoed from the top of the staircase. "Stop right there." Everyone turned. Elias Monroe stood on the landing, eyes hard, voice steady. "No one moves until I say so." The air froze. Gregory blinked, caught off guard but recovering quickly. "Elias, perfect timing. We've just uncovered something very serious." Elias's expression didn't change. "Oh, I'm sure you have." His gaze shifted to Amara, then to the watch glinting in Gregory's hand. "Now," he said softly, "let's all take a deep breath and make sure we're not about to destroy the wrong person." The room went silent except for the faint ticking of the Rolex. A clock counting down, not to shame, but to truth. The house had never been so silent. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath as Elias Monroe descended the staircase, his shoes touching each step with the weight of someone walking toward truth, not control. Every pair of eyes followed him. The guards, the officers, the staff, and Amara Hill, standing pale but upright, her daughter clinging to her side. The gold watch still gleamed in Gregory Kane's hand, but its shine now looked different, like a lie pretending to be light. "Mr. Kane," Elias said quietly, "tell me again what happened." Gregory's voice carried the ease of a rehearsed performance. "It's simple, Elias. During a routine inspection, I discovered this Rolex hidden among Ms. Hill's cleaning linens. The guards were present, and everything was recorded. I took immediate action." Elias nodded slowly, pretending to consider it. "And you're sure this is your watch?" "Of course," Gregory replied quickly. "It was a personal gift. $15,000, limited edition." "Interesting," Elias said, "because I don't remember you ever wearing that model." Gregory blinked. "Well, I have several." Elias smiled faintly, the kind of smile that says nothing but knows everything. "Yes," he said, "I'm aware." He turned toward the officers. "Gentlemen, before we go any further, I'd like to review the footage from your body cameras." Officer Ray Collins nodded, tapping the small device on his uniform. "Everything's being uploaded in real time, sir." "Good," Elias said softly. "Then let's all stand still for a moment." He reached for his phone and made a call. "Marcus," he said calmly, "it's time." Bring it in." Outside, the hum of an engine broke the tense quiet. Marcus Shaw stepped out of his car, carrying a slim laptop and a small drive in his hand. The moment he entered, the air in the room seemed to change. His presence was quiet but commanding, the kind that comes from years of reading truth off people's faces. "Morning, Mr. Monroe," Marcus said. "I've got everything you asked for." Gregory frowned. "And who might you be?" Marcus gave him a polite smile. "Just someone who likes facts more than gossip." He placed the laptop on the dining table and connected the drive. The screen flickered to life, showing multiple camera feeds from around the house, angles of hallways, entryways, and finally, the guest suite. Amara's breath caught when she saw herself cleaning, humming softly as she worked. The footage looked ordinary until the timestamp flashed forward to the moment before the inspection. On the screen, Gregory appeared, alone. He walked into the room, looking around, then bent down to the drawer. His hand slipped something inside, the gleam unmistakable even in the grainy light. He straightened his tie and left, calm as a man who believed the world wouldn't dare question him. The chateau room in real life went completely still. Elias didn't speak. He didn't have to. The truth filled the silence like thunder without sound. Gregory's face drained of color. "That's doctored," he stammered. "You've edited this." Marcus tilted his head. The footage was uploaded automatically to a secure cloud at 7:53 a.m., well before you called the guards. "Would you like me to play the security timestamp too?" Gregory opened his mouth, but no words came out. Elias folded his hands behind his back. "Marcus, would you please show the rest?" The screen changed again, showing the guards entering the same room, opening the drawer, and Gregory lifting the watch as if discovering buried treasure. The body cam feeds matched perfectly. One of the guards muttered under his breath, "He set her up." Officer Ray Collins looked toward Elias. "Sir, we can confirm this matches our live footage. The time codes align exactly." Elias nodded once. "Thank you, officer." He turned back to Gregory. "Do you know what disappoints me most?" he asked quietly. Gregory swallowed hard, saying nothing. "That you didn't just doubt her, you doubted yourself," Elias said. "You wanted to believe evil was everywhere but inside your own hands." Amara stood frozen, tears threatening but held back. Her dignity was steady, even as the humiliation replayed in her mind. Lila's small hand squeezed hers. "Mama, they know now," the girl whispered. "Yes, baby," Amara murmured, voice trembling but proud. "They do." Elias walked toward her. "Ms. Hill," he said, his tone gentle, "I owe you more than an apology." "You don't owe me anything, sir," she said quietly. "Only fairness." He nodded, his eyes softening. "Then you'll have that. And more." Gregory turned to leave, but Marcus blocked his path. "I think you might want to wait, Mr. Kane," he said evenly. "The police will want a full statement." Gregory's jaw tightened. "You can't do this. You have no authority." Elias stepped forward. "Authority isn't the point. Truth is." Victoria Kane appeared in the doorway, having rushed from her car the moment the call reached her. Her diamonds glimmered under the chandelier, but her expression was already crumbling. "Gregory, what have you done?" He turned toward her, desperate. "Mother, it's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," Elias interrupted. "A lie wrapped in gold." Victoria's gaze flicked between the screen and her son, the shame heavy enough to bow her posture. For the first time, her voice faltered. "You've humiliated this family." Gregory said nothing. Officer Collins moved closer. "Sir, we'll need to take a formal statement downtown, and the watch as evidence." Gregory's hand trembled as he handed over the Rolex. The same watch that once symbolized time and power now looked like a cufflink to his downfall. As the officers led him away, the household staff watched in silence. No one cheered, no one whispered. The only sound was Lila's soft breathing as she pressed her face against her mother's side. Marcus closed the laptop and exhaled. "Justice moves slow," he said quietly, "but it moves." Elias nodded. "And sometimes it arrives right on time." He turned to Amara. "I can't undo what you've endured, but I'll make sure your name carries respect from this day forward." She looked up, eyes bright with quiet strength. "Sir, I don't need a name. I just need peace." He nodded, humbled. "Then that's exactly what you'll have." Outside, the police car doors shut with a heavy thud. Gregory sat in the back seat, staring at his reflection in the window, distorted, fractured, fading. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be small. In the mansion doorway, Elias stood beside Amara and Lila. The storm had passed, but the air still hummed with the memory of thunder. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed 9 times. This time, its ticking sounded clean. The day that began in accusation now ended in silence. After the police cars left and the house emptied of whispers, a heavy calm settled over the Monroe estate. It was the kind of calm that follows a storm, not peace, but exhaustion. Inside, Elias Monroe stood by the tall windows of his office, watching the last trace of red sunset fade behind the city skyline. He could still see the reflections of faces from earlier that day. Amara Hill's composure, Lila's trembling courage, Gregory Kane's arrogance collapsing into disbelief. He pressed his palm against the glass. The surface was cool, grounding. For years, he had used power to create distance from pain. Now, that same power had forced him to face it head-on. The door opened quietly. Marcus Shaw entered, removing his hat. "You handled that with grace," he said. Elias shook his head. "No, she did. I just followed where the truth led." Marcus gave a half-smile. "That's more than most men do when they're cornered by it." They stood in silence for a moment. Outside, cicadas hummed faintly, their rhythm slow and steady, like a heartbeat returning to normal after fear. Downstairs, Amara sat with Lila in the small garden by the guest house. The little girl was feeding the stray kitten again, its fur white, its paws stained with soil. "Does the kitten still have no name?" Amara asked gently. Lila shook her head. "I thought of one. Hope." Amara smiled. "That's a good name. Why Hope?" "Because she keeps coming back," Lila said, lifting the kitten into her lap. "Even when it rains." Amara looked toward the mansion, the windows glowing faintly in the dusk. "Yes," she said softly, "even when it rains." Later that evening, Elias walked out to the garden. The smell of wet grass lingered from the earlier drizzle. He stopped a few feet away, hesitant, unsure if he was welcome after all that had happened. Amara noticed him and stood. "Mr. Monroe." He raised a hand gently. "Elias, please, just Elias." She nodded once. He took a slow breath. "I owe you more than an apology. You trusted this house, and it failed you. I failed you." Her expression stayed calm. "You stopped it, sir. That's what matters." He looked down at the ground, where the garden light cast long shadows between them. "You taught me something I didn't realize I'd forgotten," he said quietly. "That trust isn't built by rules. It's built by how we treat people when no one's watching." Amara smiled faintly. That's what I teach Lila, sir. To stay good when it's hardest. Then you've raised her well, Elias said. She's the bravest person I've met. Bravery, Amara replied, isn't loud. It's just not giving up. Her words sank deep as if they were meant not just for him, but for the version of himself he was trying to rebuild. Marcus approached from the patio, his tone lighter. Well, the board will have quite the morning meeting. I expect a few apologies will fly across the table. Elias turned to him. Let them keep their apologies. What I want is change. Marcus nodded. I thought you'd say that. I already drafted something. He handed Elias a folder. Inside was a short proposal for an internal ethics reform, clear hiring guidelines, fair treatment policies, and oversight mechanisms that would prevent another incident like Gregory's abuse of power. Elias scanned the first page, his eyes softening with purpose. Marcus, this is good. Good won't be enough, Marcus said. You'll have to live it. Elias looked at Amara. She'll help us with that if she's willing. Amara blinked in surprise. Me? You've seen both sides of this house, Elias said. You understand what fairness feels like from the ground up. I want you on the new internal committee, as a voice that doesn't bend to titles. She hesitated, humility mixing with disbelief. I'm not sure I belong in boardrooms. You belong anywhere truth is needed, Elias said. Lila tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mama, you should say yes. They all laughed softly, the sound like a window finally opening after days of storm. When Amara and Lila returned to their quarters, Marcus lingered in the garden with Elias. You're doing the right thing, he said. Elias nodded. For once, I hope that's true. Where will you start? Tomorrow, Elias said. I'll speak to the board myself. No lawyers, no press statements. Just truth. Marcus smirked. You giving speeches about humility? That I want to see. Elias chuckled quietly. I deserve that. Then, more seriously, he added, I used to think leadership meant control. Now I know it means responsibility. And responsibility starts with listening. Marcus clapped him gently on the shoulder. Then you're already halfway there. Inside the house, the faint echo of piano notes drifted from the living room. Elias walked back inside, drawn to the sound. One of the staff was practicing, a slow, tender melody that filled the marble halls with warmth. He stood there, eyes closed, letting the music carry him. The day's images played again in his mind. The planted watch, the crowd's judgment, Lila's tearful defense. Each memory still burned, but the pain had changed shape. It wasn't guilt anymore, but gratitude. He whispered to himself, we are all tested. Some fail, some learn. At that moment, he noticed Amara's small broom leaning against the wall near the stairs. It was ordinary, unremarkable. Yet he knew that broom had swept more than dust. It had swept pride out of his life. As the night deepened, the mansion lights dimmed one by one. From the guest house window, Amara could see Elias standing alone by the piano, the music still playing softly. Lila whispered sleepily from her bed, Mama, is it over? Amara looked out at the quiet figure and smiled. Almost, baby. Almost. And in that stillness, a fragile kind of peace began to bloom. Not loud, not triumphant, but true. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it simply breathes. Morning broke quietly over the city, a pale light brushing against the glass towers of Monroe Industries. Inside the main boardroom, the long table gleamed like a mirror, waiting for truth to take its seat. Elias Monroe stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, the skyline stretching out before him. The room was already filling, executives in tailored suits, assistants with tablets, and Harold Pierce, the board chairman, whose calm authority could steady even the most restless meeting. Elias had faced hundreds of board sessions in his life, hostile takeovers, mergers, financial crises, but this one felt different. This wasn't about money. It was about conscience. Marcus Shaw entered quietly, carrying a small case under one arm. He gave Elias a brief nod. "You ready?" Elias's voice was steady. "I was ready the moment she closed that safe." Across the table, murmurs rose as Gregory Kane appeared, escorted by two legal representatives. His expression was polished, but his eyes betrayed fatigue, the hollow look of a man who hadn't slept in nights. "Mr. Kane," Harold greeted evenly. "Thank you for joining us. Today's agenda concerns the findings from the internal audit and recent allegations regarding misconduct." Gregory smiled thinly. "Allegations can be misleading, Chairman. I'm confident this misunderstanding will be resolved quickly." Elias stepped forward, his presence quiet but commanding. "Let's make sure it's not a misunderstanding then." He gestured to Marcus, who placed the laptop at the center of the table. The screen lit up. Folder appeared labeled Incident Evidence, Timestamp Verified. Elias spoke calmly, each word deliberate. This footage was recorded legally under internal security protocols after a pattern of harassment complaints was noted. It's from the morning of the so-called theft. Gregory shifted uneasily. "Elias, this isn't necessary. We've all suffered enough embarrassment." Elias raised a hand. "You're right, Gregory, we have. But not everyone here has suffered for the same reasons." He clicked the play icon. The video began. The room's air changed immediately. There was Gregory entering the guest suite, looking around, and then, clear as daylight, slipping the Rolex beneath a scarf. The timestamp glowed in the corner, synchronized with corporate security logs. Gasps rippled across the table. One executive whispered, "Good Lord." Elias paused the video. This alone could stand as proof, but we're not finished. He opened a second file, audio log 7B, captured from the estate's garden corridor. Gregory's voice came through, crisp and cold. "It would be such a shame if your position here were misunderstood. For your daughter's sake." The playback stopped. The silence afterward was louder than any accusation. Harold Pierce leaned back, removing his glasses. "Mr. Kane," he said quietly, "do you have anything to say before this record becomes permanent?" Gregory's jaw clenched. This is manipulation, taken out of context. Marcus replied evenly, "Then you won't mind the context." He played another clip, short but devastating. It was from the moment of Gregory's staged discovery. The faint sound of his own voice could be heard muttering before the guards entered. "Right where I left it." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, spreading ripples of disbelief through the boardroom. Gregory sank back in his chair. This can't." Elias closed the laptop gently. "It can, Gregory." And it did. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Harold cleared his throat. "Effective immediately, Mr. Kane. Your duties are suspended pending legal review. Your access credentials will be revoked, and an external ethics committee will handle your case." Gregory looked around the table, searching for a sympathetic face, but found only turned eyes. The empire he had tried to inherit now looked at him like a stranger. "You think you're saving the company?" he spat. "You're killing it, replacing loyalty with fear." Elias didn't flinch. "No, Gregory. I'm replacing fear with accountability. Gregory rose abruptly, knocking over his chair. You'll regret this. Elias met his glare calmly. The only regret I have is not seeing who you were sooner. Security escorted Gregory out, the echo of his footsteps fading down the marble corridor like a final chapter closing itself. When the door shut, Harold turned to Elias. What now? When now we rebuild, Elias said, and not in spreadsheets, in people. He looked around the table at the uneasy but attentive faces. For too long, we've treated fairness like charity, something to give when convenient. That ends today. From this moment forward, Monroe Industries will measure success by integrity, not intimidation. Harold studied him, then nodded. And the woman, Ms. Hill? She's the beginning of this change, Elias said softly. Her courage deserves not just thanks, but opportunity. Marcus smiled slightly. I think you just found your next HR director. Elias returned the smile. I think so too. After the meeting, as the board members dispersed, Harold stopped Elias by the doorway. You've turned a scandal into a statement, he said. That takes strength. Elias shook his head. No, Harold. It takes humility. I had to be wrong before I could be right. Then maybe we all learned something today, Harold said, extending his hand. They shook, firm and quiet. Outside the building, the day had turned bright again. The wind carried the smell of rain-soaked pavement and new beginnings. Elias stepped into the sunlight with Marcus beside him. So, Marcus said, what's next? Elias looked toward the horizon. Transparency, real change, and a letter of gratitude that doesn't sound like pity. Marcus raised an eyebrow. For Amara? Elias nodded. For Amara. For reminding me what leadership is supposed to feel like. They reached the car, but before getting in, Elias paused. Across the street, a vendor was selling paper flowers in small bundles. He bought one, a single white lily, and held it carefully. Marcus smiled. For her daughter? No, Elias said, glancing at the flower. For truth. It deserves a place at every table. Back at the mansion later that evening, Amara opened her door to find the flower waiting on her doorstep, wrapped in a note that read, for closing one safe and opening another. Signed simply, E.M. She smiled, tears glinting but not falling. Behind her, Lila asked, Who's it from, Mama? Amara turned, kneeling to meet her daughter's curious eyes. From someone learning how to be good again. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with the softness of an apology, carrying away the last echo of deceit. And in the city above, Monroe Industries Tower caught the evening light, not as a monument to wealth, but as a mirror reflecting its first honest sunrise. By the next morning, the story was no longer a secret. The city had already begun to hum with the sound of whispers turning into headlines. Gregory Kane's arrest made the front page of every major financial paper before breakfast. Vice President accused of framing domestic worker in theft scandal. Underneath, smaller text read, Monroe Industries launches full ethics reform. From his penthouse, Elias watched the Satitsu broadcast in silence. The news anchor's tone was sharp, the kind used for scandal, not reflection. But Elias didn't flinch. He wasn't thinking about reputation anymore, only responsibility. The camera panned across the estate gates where journalists and onlookers had gathered. Microphones jutted forward like spears, reporters shouting questions that blurred together into a storm of noise. Mr. Monroe, did you know about the frame-up? Is the company collapsing? What happens to the Maid now? Elias sighed. He closed the television and turned to Marcus Shaw, who stood near the doorway watching him carefully. "They'll keep digging," Marcus said. "That's what the press does." Elias nodded. "Let them. The truth doesn't need hiding. It just needs telling properly." He picked up his jacket. "Let's go outside." When the front doors opened, a wave of camera flashes cut through the morning light. The crowd surged forward, microphones thrusting, questions overlapping. Elias raised a hand, not commanding, but calm. His expression carried no defense, no anger, only quiet composure. "Good morning," he began. His voice was firm enough to travel, but soft enough to steady the chaos. "Before anyone asks, I will say this. No empire is worth protecting if it stands on silence." The reporters quieted, almost surprised. He continued, "A man I trusted tried to weaponize a lie against someone who had done nothing but serve with dignity. That truth is now out, and our company will face that truth fully, not through lawyers, but through change." One reporter called out, "Will you resign, Mr. Monroe?" Elias shook his head gently. "No, I won't run from the mistakes made under my name. I'll repair them. That's leadership, not perfection, but accountability." The statement rolled through the crowd like a tide. Another journalist asked, "And the woman, Ms. Hill? What becomes of her?" Elias smiled faintly. "She's already proven who she is. From today, Ms. Amara Hill is the new Director of People and Culture for Monroe Industries. She'll help us make sure fairness isn't just a word we use when cameras are watching." The reporters murmured, pens scribbling, flashes snapping faster. But Elias didn't flinch under the light. For the first time, he stood there not as a man being questioned, but as one finally answering. Inside, Amara Hill watched the live broadcast on a small kitchen television. She held a cup of tea between her palms, her heart beating slow but steady. Lila sat beside her, swinging her legs off the stool, eyes wide. "Mama, he said your name on TV." Amara smiled softly. "Yes, he did." "Does that mean we're famous now?" the girl asked. Amara laughed, a sound that felt like breathing after being underwater. "No, baby. It means people are listening." Lila tilted her head, thinking. "That's better than famous." Amara reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. "It is, sweetheart. Much better." Out by the gates, as the questions continued, Elias noticed a familiar face among the reporters. Tara Miles, a journalist known for her measured stories, held a microphone but hadn't spoken yet. When the crowd began to thin, she stepped forward. "Mr. Monroe," she said gently, "I was one of the first to report the rumor when it broke. I'd like to make sure the correction is louder than the lie." Elias gave a small nod. "Then you'll have the truth, Ms. Miles, unedited." Tara lowered her microphone slightly. "Can I ask one question off the record?" "Of course." She paused. "You could have blamed Gregory entirely, distanced yourself. Why take responsibility?" Elias looked at the ground for a moment before answering. "Because power doesn't erase guilt. It multiplies it when we ignore it. If I didn't hold myself accountable, I'd be no different than him." Tara smiled, the kind of smile that meant respect, not pity. "Thank you, Mr. Monroe." When she turned away, Marcus whispered, "You just gave her the headline." Elias smiled faintly. "Good. Let it read something true for once." Hours later, the news aired across every channel. Billionaire admits systemic failure, elevates former maid to executive role. The segment showed Elias's calm demeanor, Marcus standing quietly behind him, and the small moment when he handed the microphone away mid-question, a gesture of humility rather than control. Tara Miles's voiceover played gently over the footage. In a world obsessed with power, it's rare to see a man surrender it willingly. But today, at the Monroe estate, humility stood taller than marble. When the journalists finally left, the gates closed and the noise faded into quiet. Elias exhaled deeply, shoulders dropping. Marcus clapped him on the back. "You survived the first storm." Elias smiled. "The next one will be rebuilding." Marcus grinned. "That's the better kind of storm." As evening fell, a black car arrived at the mansion. The door opened, and Amara Hill stepped out, dressed not in her work uniform, but in a simple navy dress. She looked around, hesitant. Elias met her halfway down the steps. "You saw the broadcast?" "I did," she said. "You didn't have to do all that." "Yes, I did," he replied. "The world needed to see what real strength looks like." She smiled faintly. "And what does it look like, Mr. Monroe?" He looked at her for a long moment. "It looks like a woman who kept her grace when everyone tried to take it from her." Amara's eyes softened. "Then maybe we both learned something about power." They stood in silence as the first stars appeared overhead. From inside the house, Lila's laughter drifted through the open windows, the kitten meowing in reply. Elias chuckled quietly. "Seems your daughter's already taking charge." "She always does," Amara said. "She just does it kindly." He nodded. "That's leadership, too." Later that night, Tara Miles's report aired one final time on the evening news. Her closing line echoed softly through countless living rooms. "Justice is not the end of a story. It's the beginning of one that people choose to tell differently." In the mansion's guest house, Amara switched off the television, turned to her daughter, and whispered, "Sleep, baby. Tomorrow will be better." Lila murmured, half awake, "Promise?" Amara smiled. "Promise." Outside, the last reporters packed up their gear, and the glow from the estate windows shimmered gently against the dark. For the first time in months, the night held no secrets. The following week began not with headlines, but with reckoning. The glow of the media storm was fading, but its heat still lingered. Inside Monroe Industries, quiet tension pulsed through every corridor. Executives who once traded smiles and power lunches now whispered behind closed doors. For the first time in the company's history, everyone was watching not for the next profit report, but for accountability. On the top floor, the boardroom was full again. But this time, the usual polish had dimmed. The air smelled faintly of coffee and unease. Harold Pierce, the board chairman, sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He looked tired but firm, like a man ready to do what decency required. At his side sat Elias Monroe, calm and centered, though the circles beneath his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Across from them, the remaining executives waited for direction. The absence of Gregory Kane was a presence all its own, an invisible ghost sitting where arrogance once lived. Harold cleared his throat. "We have much to discuss," he began. "But let's start with the obvious. The Kane family's assets and influence in this company are officially frozen, pending the court's decision. We'll no longer accept campaign contributions, donations, or board seats tied to their estate." A low murmur rippled through the room. Elias spoke quietly, but his words carried weight. "Let's make one thing clear. This isn't vengeance. It's house cleaning. We built this company to create innovation, not to protect the old walls of privilege." One executive hesitated. Mr. Monroe. The Canes have been investors since the beginning. Cutting them off completely, won't that damage our stock confidence? Elias met his gaze evenly, maybe for a moment. But there's a different kind of confidence we need more. The confidence of our employees to believe they're working for something fair. Silence followed. Then Harold nodded slowly. I agree. Reputation can recover. Integrity can't if we lose it. He turned to a stack of papers beside him. Effective immediately, we're establishing a permanent fair practice and inclusion division. Ms. Amara Hill has been appointed as its head. She'll report directly to Elias and the board. Another wave of whispers filled the room. Someone muttered, "A domestic worker on the board?" Elias's eyes lifted sharply, calm but unyielding. "A woman who demonstrated integrity under fire," he said, "and who, unlike most of us, never forgot what honesty looks like." The room went still. Downstairs, unaware of the exact conversation unfolding above, Amara Hill stood by the large window of the HR floor, holding her new company badge. It read simply, Amara Hill, Director of People and Culture. The letters didn't make her feel powerful. They made her feel responsible. She looked out over the city skyline, thinking about how strange life could be. 1 month ago, she'd been polishing desks. Now, those same desks waited for her approval to change how the company treated its people. Lila's voice echoed in her memory from that morning. "Mama, are you nervous?" She had smiled and replied, "A little, but good nervous. The kind that means something new is starting." Back upstairs, Harold handed Elias a printed document, the Ethics Charter, the company's first ever internal moral framework. "Every executive will sign this by the end of the day," Harold said. "No exceptions." Elias read the first paragraph aloud. "No empire should stand taller than its conscience." He smiled faintly. "You remembered the words." Harold chuckled. "They stuck with me." Elias's tone softened. "Let's make sure they stick with everyone else." Marcus, standing near the back of the room, watched the exchange with quiet pride. After decades in law enforcement, he had seen countless men in power promise change and deliver paperwork. But something about this felt different, earnest, human. Outside the building, reporters waited again, but this time, they didn't shout accusations. They asked questions about reform, about Amara, about the company's new direction. A few even called Monroe Industries a model of corporate redemption. Inside, Amara walked through her new office, a modest space with simple furniture and a vase of lilies on the desk. A quiet nod from Elias. She set down a framed photo of Lila beside it. The little girl's smile seemed to light the room more than the lamps. Marcus knocked on the doorframe. "Settling in?" Amara turned, smiling. "Trying to." He handed her a folder. "Background checks for the new ethics officers. We're hiring fresh eyes, people who've lived the things they're protecting against." Amara nodded. "That's good. Real fairness needs more than rules. It needs perspective." Marcus chuckled. "You sound like someone who's been teaching that all her life." She smiled knowingly. "Maybe I have." Later that afternoon, the board reconvened to vote on the final motions. Elias addressed the room one last time. "Gentlemen, ladies, today isn't about saving face. It's about facing ourselves. We let arrogance grow because it was profitable. We ignored warning signs because silence was comfortable. But silence built this storm. We won't build another." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "I want every person in this company to know that doing right will never cost them their job again. The room fell quiet. Then Harold Pierce, the chairman, tapped the table once. All in favor? Hands rose, every one of them. Elias nodded slowly. Then it settled. When the meeting ended, Elias walked to the window overlooking the courtyard below. He could see Amara crossing the garden, sunlight catching the edges of her hair. She paused to help a new intern carry a stack of files, smiling as she spoke. He found himself smiling too, not out of pride, but gratitude. Marcus joined him, hands in his pockets. "You did it," he said. Elias shook his head. "We did it, and she saved us all." Marcus chuckled. "You know, for a man who used to think trust was a weakness, you've come a long way." Elias turned slightly. "Maybe trust isn't weakness after all. Maybe it's the start of strength." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's one for the next company memo." They both laughed softly, the sound echoing gently against the high ceilings. By evening, the boardroom lights dimmed. The city outside glowed gold, reflected in the building's tall windows. Amara stepped into the elevator, her badge catching the last rays of sun. She pressed the button for the lobby, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding all day. As the doors closed, her reflection stared back at her. Not the maid she once was, but the woman who had helped rebuild a broken system. And somewhere above her, in his quiet office, Elias looked at the now empty chair where Gregory once sat and whispered to himself, "No empire, only people." The city hummed softly below, alive with the sound of small beginnings. The air inside the recording studio felt still, almost reverent. The lights were low, the sound panels swallowed every stray echo. Elias Monroe sat at the microphone, a sheet of paper before him, though most of the words had already been memorized. Outside the glass, Marcus Shaw watched quietly beside the sound engineer. This wasn't the kind of speech you rehearsed. It was the kind you carried. Elias adjusted the mic. "How's the sound?" Marcus gave a thumbs up. "Clear, whenever you're ready." Elias nodded once. For a long breath, he didn't speak. Then, slowly, he began. "Good evening. This message isn't a statement for investors or a defense for my reputation. It's an apology, one I should have given sooner. A few weeks ago, I learned that success can make you deaf. You start hearing only the applause, and you stop listening to the quiet warnings of conscience. I tested an innocent woman because I believed the world had no more honesty left in it. But she and her little girl proved I was wrong." He paused. His reflection on the glass looked older, but lighter. "I won't pretend this company is suddenly perfect. We made mistakes, serious ones. We ignored the signs of arrogance and called them confidence. We confused silence with loyalty. That ends now." His voice wavered slightly, not from weakness, but sincerity. "I built Monroe Industries on innovation, but somewhere along the way, I forgot integrity. A child reminded me that the smallest act of honesty can carry more power than all the numbers on a screen. So from this day, every decision we make will answer one simple question. Is it right? Not is it profitable? Is it right?" He looked down at the paper, then folded it away. The rest, he wanted to speak from the heart. When you lead people, you owe them more than jobs. You owe them fairness and dignity. And when that dignity is stolen, the leader must give it back. Not with money, but with change. That's what I intend to do. Not to erase my mistakes, but to make them matter for something. He exhaled slowly, then added one final line. "Sometimes you have to lose faith in yourself before you remember what faith in others feels like." The red light on the recording board flicked off. The studio fell silent. Marcus smiled softly through the glass. "That's the one," he said. Elias leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Feels like closing a door and opening another." Marcus chuckled. "Then it's the right door." The video went live that evening across every platform: company site, press channels, social media feeds. Within hours, the comments poured in. Some were skeptical. Another billionaire trying to look noble. Others were deeply moved. This is what accountability should sound like. And somewhere among thousands of voices, a quiet message appeared. "My daughter and I watched this together. Thank you for showing her that truth still matters." Elias read that one twice. It didn't come from Amara. It came from someone he would never meet. But it told him the message had reached where it needed to. Meanwhile, in the small apartment behind the estate, Amara Hill and Lila were watching the broadcast together. Lila sat cross-legged on the sofa, chin resting in her hands. "He looks nervous," she said. Amara smiled. "That's because telling the truth always makes your heart beat faster." When the speech ended, the screen faded to a simple black frame with white text. "Integrity is not a policy, it's a promise." Lila whispered, "I like that." Amara nodded. "Me too." The little girl turned to her. "Mama, do you forgive him?" Amara thought for a long moment. "I think forgiveness isn't something you say. It's something you see. And right now, I see someone trying." Lila leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "Then that's good enough." At the office the next morning, employees gathered in the lobby around the large video wall where the speech replayed on a loop. Some watched with tears in their eyes. Others stood quietly, hands clasped, thinking about the lines that hit home. In the corner, a janitor wiped his eyes and muttered, "Finally, a boss who sounds human." For the first time in months, the building felt alive again. Not from money, but from meaning. Elias arrived later than usual, surprised to find applause waiting for him as he walked through the glass doors. It wasn't loud or staged. It was gentle, respectful, the kind of clapping that says, "Thank you, we needed this." He stopped, nodded to the crowd, and simply said, "Let's get back to work, the right way." Upstairs, he met Amara outside her new office. She greeted him with her usual calm. "You made quite the speech," she said. "It was overdue," he replied. She studied him for a moment. "You know what I liked most?" "What's that?" "You didn't try to be perfect in it." He smiled. "That's because I finally learned I'm not." She laughed softly. "Took you long enough." They both chuckled, the sound light but sincere. Later that day, Marcus joined Elias in his office. "You're trending," he said with a grin. Elias groaned. "That's never good." "Actually, it is this time. Hashtags, interviews, analysts calling it a turning point for corporate ethics. Even the employees are sharing stories about acts of kindness in the workplace." Elias looked thoughtful. "Kindness shouldn't need a trend." "No," Marcus agreed. "But sometimes trends remind people what they already knew." He placed a small envelope on Elias's desk. "You might want to see this. It came through internal mail." Inside was a handwritten note in neat script. "Dear Mr. Monroe, thank you for believing in my mom. I know she's strong, but everyone needs someone to stand beside them sometimes. Sincerely, Lila." Elias smiled, eyes soft. "She's going to run the world one day." Marcus grinned. "Let's hope she runs it better than we did." That evening, as the office emptied, Elias stood by the large window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in the twilight, lights flickering like distant candles. He thought of the speech, the headlines, the letters, and the quiet strength of the people who had endured what he couldn't see. For the first time in years, he felt not powerful, but peaceful. Behind him, Marcus's voice broke the silence. "So what's next, boss?" Elias smiled faintly. "No more speeches, just work worth talking about." They left the office together as the lights dimmed. Outside, the city moved like a slow heartbeat, steady and alive. And somewhere in the distance, a single voice on the radio replayed his words again. "A child reminded me that the smallest act of honesty can carry more power than all the numbers on a screen." In that moment, Elias realized the confession wasn't just heard, it was believed. The city forgot his name faster than he expected. For years, Gregory Kane had been a man everyone wanted to be near. His parties, his influence, his polished grin that looked expensive even without words. But now, his phone barely buzzed, and when it did, it wasn't from friends. It was from lawyers. The headlines that once celebrated his charm had turned him into a warning. Former vice president faces fraud and defamation charges. The same newspapers that once printed his photo in glossy spreads now printed his mugshot in grayscale. He lived alone now, in a high-rise apartment that felt emptier than any cell could. The curtains were drawn, the lights dim, the air heavy with dust and regret. His reflection in the window no longer looked like a man of power, just a man running out of mirrors. The day his court date was announced, Gregory sat at his dining table staring at the envelope. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The world had already passed judgment long before the law did. On the table lay the only thing he'd kept from his old life, a single cufflink engraved with the initials GK. Its twin had gone missing months ago during the investigation. Somehow, that felt fitting. He poured himself a drink, but stopped halfway. The sound of the liquid hitting the glass was too loud in the silence. He set the bottle down and rubbed his eyes. In the quiet, he heard echoes of his mother's voice. Victoria Kane, crisp and cold as ever. "People like us must protect our circles." But the circle had broken, and she was gone too, retreated from society, avoiding reporters and dinner parties that now whispered her name with pity. He tried calling her once after the trial began. She didn't answer. Meanwhile, at Monroe Industries, the world moved on. The company's new ethics reforms gained national attention. Universities invited Elias to speak about leadership transformation. Articles titled "The Billionaire Who Listened" spread across professional networks. And through it all, Amara Hill continued her quiet work. She declined interviews, stayed out of cameras, and spent most of her time mentoring young employees who had once felt unseen. When asked about her new title, she simply said, "It's not about title, it's about trust." In one of the company's hallways, a framed quote now hung permanently on the wall. "Integrity is not a policy, it's a promise." Below it, Lila's drawing of a safe with a heart inside had been copied, framed, and displayed beside the quote. Visitors stopped there often, not because of the story, but because of the feeling it carried. But for Gregory, the feeling was different. Each headline about the company's rebirth was another reminder of what he'd tried to destroy. Each photograph of Elias and Amara standing beside employees felt like a reflection of everything he wasn't. He told himself he didn't care. He told himself they'd moved on too easily. But resentment, when left alone, turns into something quieter than anger, something heavier. Weeks passed before his sentencing. The verdict was clear. 2 years of supervised release, community service, and financial restitution to Monroe Industries for defamation. It wasn't prison, but it was worse in its own way. Freedom without purpose can feel like a cage. He found temporary work in a logistics firm under a different name. No corner office, no assistance, no respect. Just a desk by the window and a stack of invoices that didn't care who he used to be. On his first day, the manager introduced him without ceremony. "This is Greg," he said. "He'll handle data entry. He's good with numbers." Gregory smiled politely, the way you do when pretending the world hasn't changed. But at lunch, sitting alone with a sandwich that tasted like penance, he heard 2 employees chatting behind him. "You hear about that Monroe story?" one asked. "The maid who became an exec?" "Yeah," said the other. "Crazy, right? Kinda nice to see something good happen for once." Gregory froze, chewing slowly. He stared at the half-eaten sandwich and felt a quiet ache that words couldn't name. That night, as he walked home, the city lights blurred through drizzle. The rain wasn't heavy, just persistent, like the universe reminding him that no one escapes consequence completely dry. He passed a newspaper stand. His face wasn't there anymore. That used to comfort him. Now it only felt like erasure. He stopped at a bus stop bench and sat for a while, watching cars pass. For the first time, he didn't feel angry at Elias or at Amara. He felt small, but in a way that allowed air to enter again. He whispered into the night, "I'm sorry." No one heard it, but that didn't matter. Sometimes confessions are meant for the silence, not the audience. A few weeks later, he received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small business card. The card read, "The Hill Initiative, Scholarship and Employment Fund for Single Parents." The letter was short. "Mr. Kane, we are aware of your community service placement and wish to offer you an opportunity to contribute to our outreach program. Every story, even the broken ones, can help teach others how to rebuild. Amara Hill." For a long time, Gregory stared at the letter, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The kindness in it hurt more than any punishment. He folded the paper carefully, placing it inside his old wallet where the cufflink once rested. Then he wrote a reply, his handwriting unsteady. "Miss Hill, thank you for offering me something I no longer thought I deserved. A second chance. I'll help in any way I can." He mailed it the next day. Months later, Gregory found himself standing before a small group of young trainees at the Hill Initiative's downtown center. He spoke softly, telling his story without embellishment. How arrogance blinds, how power tempts, how one act of cruelty can cost a life's worth of respect. He ended with the words Elias once said to him, "Authority isn't the point. Truth is." When he finished, the room was silent, but not judgmental. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Do you believe people can change?" Gregory smiled faintly, only when they stopped trying to justify who they were. That night, he walked home under clear skies. The city felt different now, slower, almost kind. At an intersection, he passed a newsstand again. The latest magazine cover read, "Monroe Industries wins Global Ethics Award." He paused, smiled, and whispered, "Good." Then he kept walking. The streetlights followed him like quiet forgiveness, and for the first time in a long time, Gregory Kane didn't feel like a villain trying to disappear. He felt like a man learning how to begin again. The morning sun found its way through the tall windows of the Monroe estate, landing in soft gold stripes across the floor. The house, once a place of quiet suspicion, now felt alive again. like a heart that had learned how to beat slower, steadier, and with purpose. In the kitchen, Amara Hill stood at the counter brewing coffee. The smell filled the room, warm and grounding. Lila sat nearby, humming to herself while she fed the kitten, which had now grown into a confident little cat named Hope. "You have a meeting today, Mama," Lila reminded her between spoonfuls of cereal. "I do," Amara said with a gentle smile. "Mr. Monroe wants to make it official." "Make what official?" "That I'm no longer working for the house," Amara said softly. "I'll be working with the company." Lila's eyes widened. "Like in the tall building?" Amara nodded. "Exactly like that." The child's grin lit up the room. "Does that mean you'll have your own office?" Amara chuckled. "A small one, maybe with a window." Lila thought for a second, then said, "You should put a plant on your desk. Plants help you breathe when you forget to." Amara laughed again. "Then I'll bring two." A few hours later, Amara stood at the entrance of Monroe Industries. She had been here before, quietly, invisibly, during the early days of the scandal, but this time felt different. People greeted her with nods and small smiles. No whispers followed her anymore. In the elevator, she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. The same woman looked back at her, but her eyes carried something new, peace that had earned its way in. The doors opened on the top floor, revealing a corridor lined with framed photos of the company's milestones. The last one showed Elias standing with employees from all departments. Underneath, a new plaque read, "Integrity is the foundation of every innovation." Elias was waiting for her near the boardroom door, sleeves rolled up, as though he had traded formality for sincerity. "Good morning, Amara," he greeted. "Good morning, sir," she replied automatically, then corrected herself. "Good morning, Elias," he smiled. "That's better." Inside the boardroom, Harold Pierce and Marcus Shaw were already seated. Papers and tablets were spread across the table, but the atmosphere was casual. Elias gestured for Amara to take the chair beside him. "We've already made the announcement publicly, but I wanted this to come directly from me and from us," he said. He slid a simple folder across the table. Inside was a letter of appointment, printed on company stationery. At the bottom, in neat ink, was her name and new title, Amara Hill, Director of People and Culture. Elias said softly, "You've already been doing this job without the title. Now it's just official." Amara looked down at the paper, the words blurring slightly as emotion rose in her chest. "I don't know what to say." Marcus smiled. "That's a first." Harold chuckled quietly. "Don't worry, Ms. Hill. Most of us were speechless when we first saw our own names on that letterhead." Amara took a slow breath. "I'll do my best to earn this every day." Elias shook his head. "You already have. This isn't a reward. It's recognition." They spent the next hour discussing her ideas. Amara outlined plans for a mentoring network, an open-door ethics hotline, and scholarship opportunities for staff families. Each suggestion was practical, compassionate, and focused on giving everyone a fair chance. Marcus leaned back, impressed. "You've thought this through." Amara smiled faintly. "When you've been on the other side of a closed door, you learn exactly how it should open." Elias listened quietly, then said, "Let's make sure those doors never close again." Harold added, "You have the full board's support, and mine." For the first time since she entered the building, Amara felt something deep inside her settle, like the final note of a long, unfinished song finding its place. That afternoon, the company cafeteria buzzed with warmth as news of her appointment spread. Employees who barely spoke to executives before came up to congratulate her. One woman, a janitor Amara used to share lunch breaks with, hugged her tightly. "You're proof we're seen now," the woman whispered. Amara smiled, touched. "We've always been seen." Now they finally opened their eyes. When she returned to her office, she found a small box on the desk with a note in Elias's handwriting. "For your first day in your new space." Inside was a white ceramic pot containing a young fern, its leaves curling delicately toward the light. A small card beside it read, "Plants help you breathe when you forget to. Lila." Amara laughed softly, tears filling her eyes. She placed the fern near the window, where the afternoon sun reached through the glass. Later that day, she received a message from Gregory Kane's community outreach supervisor. The subject line read, "Hill Initiative Contribution Update." She opened it, expecting a brief report, but inside was a letter from Gregory himself. "Ms. Hill, I wanted you to know that I've started volunteering at the initiative every weekend. The people there remind me of something I forgot long ago, that work can heal instead of harm. I'm grateful you let me be part of it." Amara read it twice, then folded the letter carefully and placed it in her drawer. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing peace over bitterness, and in that moment, she chose it fully. As evening fell, Elias stopped by her office one last time before heading out. "How was your first day as director?" he asked with a grin. Amara smiled. "A little overwhelming, mostly wonderful." He nodded. "That's how good things begin." They stood by the window for a moment, watching the city lights blink on one by one. The building's reflection shimmered softly on the glass, a company reborn in the glow of its own humility. Elias spoke quietly. "I once thought power meant being untouchable, but today, seeing this, I think power means creating something that outlives your mistakes." Amara looked at him and said, "Then you finally learned what real power is." He smiled, humbled. "I had good teachers." She laughed gently. "And one of them was 8 years old." He nodded. "The best kind." Outside, the sky deepened into blue-gray twilight. As Amara left the building, she glanced up at the Monroe logo illuminated above the entrance. Beneath it, she could almost imagine a second light glowing faintly, the one her mother once described in old stories. The light of honest work, carried quietly in people who do right even when no one notices. She smiled. "Let it stay on," she whispered to herself, "for everyone who comes after." Spring came gently that year. It didn't rush the city awake. It coaxed it. The wind carried the scent of rain and new beginnings, and inside the offices of Monroe Industries, something had started to grow that no profit chart could measure. On the top floor, Amara Hill sat at her desk, reviewing a stack of scholarship applications. The Hill Initiative, once just an idea scribbled in her notebook, was now a living program with over 100 applicants. Many were parents, some rebuilding their lives after layoffs or discrimination. Every story reminded her why this work mattered. She paused at one application written in careful cursive. The name read, Angela Ramos, a single mother from the Bronx applying for evening classes in logistics management. At the end of the form, Angela had written a single line, "I want my daughter to see me try." Amara smiled softly, setting the paper aside. "You will," she murmured. Outside her office, the company's culture was changing in quiet ways. The break rooms now had open suggestion boards, and instead of corporate memos, people left notes of encouragement. Someone had drawn a cartoon of a safe with a heart inside, the same image from Lila's drawing that hung in the lobby. Down the hall, a young intern stopped by Amara's door. "Director Hill?" Amara looked up. "Yes?" "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone asking for you in the lobby. Says he used to work here." Amara rose, curious. "Thank you. I'll be right down." In the lobby, a familiar figure stood near the glass doors. Gregory Kane, dressed simply in a gray jacket and jeans, held a small envelope in his hand. His expression carried humility, the kind that no courtroom or lecture could teach. "Mr. Kane," Amara said quietly. He turned, startled but calm. "Ms. Hill, I didn't want to intrude. I just wanted to return something." He handed her the envelope. Inside was a gold cufflink engraved with the initials GK. "I found it when I cleaned out my old office," he said. "I thought about selling it, but it reminded me too much of what I lost." Amara studied the cufflink for a moment, then looked up. "And what did you lose?" He hesitated, then said, "The sound of my own honesty. I used to think success meant never saying sorry. Now I think success means never needing to." Amara nodded slowly. "That's a good lesson." He gave a faint smile. "I learned it from someone who didn't have to forgive me, but did." Amara's tone was gentle. "Forgiveness isn't a favor, Mr. Kane. It's a door. You just chose to walk through it." Gregory exhaled, relief softening his shoulders. "I volunteer every week now. The Hill Initiative. It's doing more good than you know." "I'm glad," Amara said. "Keep walking through those doors. Others will follow." He nodded, then extended his hand. She shook it, firm, brief, complete. As he turned to leave, the security guard at the desk gave him a small nod, the kind that said "welcome back" without words. Gregory smiled faintly and walked into the daylight, blending into the city that was finally big enough to forgive him. Later that afternoon, Elias stopped by Amara's office, carrying a stack of signed documents. "Here it is," he said, placing them on her desk. "The full budget approval for the Hill Initiative's next phase." Amara's eyes widened. "That's twice what we planned." He smiled. "Then plan bigger." She laughed softly. "I'll try to spend it responsibly." Elias leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You already do. You spend everything, your time, your heart, your patience, on people who need it. That's the best investment this company ever made." She looked down, touched. "Thank you, Elias. But I didn't do this alone." He nodded. "No one ever rebuilds alone." A beat passed before she added quietly, "You've changed, you know." Elias chuckled. "I've noticed. Apparently I smile now. HR thinks it's suspicious." They both laughed, the sound lightening the air. That evening, Amara hosted a small event in the courtyard to celebrate the first round of scholarship recipients. The setting sun painted the sky in pale gold, and fairy lights twinkled between the trees. Employees, families, and community partners gathered around tables, sharing food and quiet conversation. Lila darted between chairs, handing out handmade thank you cards decorated with tiny drawings of hearts, books, and flowers. Elias took the stage briefly, tapping the microphone. "Tonight isn't about success. It's about growth. We learned that progress doesn't start with ideas. It starts with empathy, and no one here embodies that better than Amara Hill." The crowd applauded warmly. Amara blushed, shaking her head, but her smile said otherwise. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady yet soft. "I don't believe in heroes," she began. "I believe in moments, little ones, a child telling the truth, A worker speaking up, a leader choosing humility. Every act of courage, no matter how small, plants something. Those are the seeds that change everything. Her eyes moved over the audience, landing briefly on Gregory, who stood quietly near the back, nodding in agreement. She continued, "We can't control how fast those seeds grow, but we can keep the soil kind." Applause followed, but it wasn't loud. It was slow, rhythmic, sincere, the kind that feels like gratitude breathing. After the event, when the crowd had thinned, Lila ran up to her mother. "Mama, did you see everyone smiling?" Amara knelt, hugging her. "I did. It's the best kind of smile. Earned." Elias joined them, carrying 2 paper cups of lemonade. He handed one to Lila, one to Amara. "To new beginnings," he said. Lila clinked her cup against theirs. "And to good people staying good." Elias smiled. "That's the real goal." As night settled over the courtyard, the lights swayed gently in the breeze. Amara looked up at the sky, clear, open, forgiving. Somewhere, a songbird trilled once, then quieted. She thought about everything that had happened, the humiliation, the reversal, the rebuilding. None of it had been easy. But healing rarely is. It's not a clean process. It's a garden that grows unevenly, one leaf at a time. And tonight, that garden was blooming. The company had found its conscience. The people had found their voice. And somewhere between power and humility, Amara Hill had found her place. Soft fade out, night ambience, faint laughter from courtyard, gentle piano rising under narration. Pull forward cue. But the night wasn't just a celebration. It was a beginning, and the legacy of those seeds would soon reach far beyond the company walls. Dawn arrived soft and pale, like the first page of a new book. The sun had not yet burned away the morning mist, and the glass towers of the city glowed faintly, half in light, half in memory. Inside her apartment, Amara Hill was already awake. She poured water into the pot for tea, then opened the window. The smell of dew drifted in, mixed with the faint hum of traffic far below. The world was stirring again, the way it always does. Quiet first, then steady, then full. She looked over at Lila, still asleep on the couch, her hair fanned across a pillow. The cat, Hope, curled beside her, purring like a soft drumbeat. Amara smiled, whispering, "Sleep a little longer, sweetheart. The world can wait for you today." For once, she wasn't rushing anywhere. Her life had finally found a rhythm, measured not by what she owed others, but by what she could build for herself and those who came after. Later that morning, Amara arrived at the Monroe campus early. The lobby was quiet, the marble floors reflecting the slow rise of daylight. Near the entrance stood the glass case that now held a small plaque, newly engraved. The Hill Initiative, founded on the belief that dignity begins with opportunity. Underneath were the names of its first 20 scholarship recipients, etched carefully in gold. Amara ran her fingers across the plaque, not for pride, but for grounding. It wasn't her achievement alone. It was a collective promise, carved into glass so no one could forget it. She turned to see Marcus Shaw approaching, his jacket slung casually over one arm. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She smiled. "Never could, on big days." "You know," Marcus said, glancing at the plaque, "I've seen a lot of programs come and go in my time. Most start with speeches and end with paperwork, but this one feels alive." "That's because it came from real pain," Amara said softly. "And pain, if you treat it right, grows into something good." Marcus nodded, eyes warm. "You've turned survival into a system, Maybe, she said, but I just call it fairness. Upstairs, Elias Monroe prepared for the press conference that would announce the company's expansion of the Hill Initiative to its international branches. The plan included paid training, mentorship for underrepresented groups, and a permanent annual grant for community projects. He reviewed his notes, then paused, smiling to himself. On the top of the page, written in Amara's handwriting, was a single sentence: "Change that lasts must be shared." He didn't change a word of it. When he entered the main hall, flashes from cameras greeted him. Rows of reporters sat waiting, pens ready. He took his place at the podium, the company's new logo glowing behind him. Sleek, simple, and beneath it, a new tagline: "Innovation with integrity." "Good morning," Elias began. "2 years ago, I stood before the world for the wrong reasons. Today, I stand here for the right ones. Back then, I believed success meant distance, from mistakes, from emotion, from accountability. I was wrong. Real success lives closer to the ground, with the people who make it possible. That's why the Hill Initiative is no longer a department. It's our foundation. It belongs to every person who's ever been underestimated and to every leader brave enough to listen." He paused as applause filled the hall. Among the crowd, Amara stood quietly beside Marcus, her expression proud but humble. Elias continued, "This company learned a lesson the hard way, but sometimes the hardest lessons become the brightest lanterns, and we intend to carry that light wherever we go." After the conference, reporters clustered around Amara. A young journalist asked, "Ms. Hill, how does it feel to see your name attached to something so big?" She smiled gently. "Names fade. Impact doesn't. I just hope it helps someone stand a little taller than I did when this began." The journalist nodded, visibly moved. A second reporter asked, "What's next for you?" Amara laughed softly. "What's next? Probably lunch, maybe more paperwork." Everyone laughed with her. The tone was lighter now. No longer pity, no longer curiosity, just respect. That evening, as the office emptied, Elias found Amara standing by the window again. The city below shimmered like a reflection of everything they had rebuilt. He joined her, silent for a moment. "Do you ever think about that first day?" he asked. Amara nodded. "Every time I walk past the guest suite. I almost ruined everything," he said quietly. She looked at him, her tone kind but firm. "You didn't ruin it. You revealed it. Sometimes the truth needs to fall apart before it can stand up straight." He smiled. "You always know how to say it better." "That's because I've had to live it," she replied, half teasing, half honest. They both laughed softly, then stood in comfortable silence as the light faded. Later that week, Amara returned home with Lila and the cat. The evening was warm, the kind that made even the air feel forgiving. Lila ran to the window and pointed at the stars. "Mama, look, it's clear tonight," Amara smiled. "Make a wish." The girl closed her eyes, whispering something too quiet to hear. When she opened them again, she asked, "Do wishes ever come true, or do we just grow into them?" Amara thought for a moment. Maybe both. Maybe they start small, like seeds, and we keep watering them until they look like real life. Lila nodded thoughtfully. "Then mine's growing already." Before bed, Amara sat at her desk, writing in her journal. Her handwriting was slower now, more deliberate. When truth is tested, it either breaks or blooms. Ours bloomed. And from that bloom came light. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. That's enough. She closed the book, set down her pen, and looked out the window. The skyline shimmered with hundreds of small lights, office windows, street lamps, apartments full of people trying their best. Each one looked like its own tiny story of redemption. And somewhere out there, she imagined Gregory teaching another class at the initiative, Elias preparing another speech about fairness, and Lila dreaming of the future she would one day build with her own two hands. The world wasn't perfect, but it was better. And sometimes, better was exactly what people needed to believe in again. The seasons rolled forward quietly, the way meaningful change often does, without announcement, without applause, just a steady rhythm of people doing better because they could. At Monroe Industries, the Hill Initiative had become more than a program. It had become a movement. Employees spoke of it not in terms of policy, but in stories about how someone got their first chance, or how a forgotten voice was finally heard. The walls that once echoed with hierarchy now hummed with collaboration. And though no one said it out loud, everyone knew. This shift had begun the moment a maid's daughter taught a billionaire to listen. One rainy afternoon, Amara Hill sat in the conference room reviewing a proposal for an international mentorship exchange. The idea was simple: pair rising managers with community workers from underprivileged backgrounds, not just to teach leadership, but empathy. She traced her finger along one line of the proposal that read, "Humanity is the best management strategy." She smiled. That sounded like something Lila might say one day. Her phone buzzed. A video call from Marcus Shaw. "Got a minute?" he asked when she answered. "For you, always," she said. His background showed a group of students sitting in a classroom. "Guess where I am?" Amara squinted at the screen. "Are you teaching again?" "Sort of," Marcus said with a grin. "Community outreach class. Hill Initiative invited me to guest speak. I was telling them how truth isn't just a moral choice. It's a practical one." Amara laughed. "You're becoming poetic in your retirement." Marcus winked. "Careful. You're starting to sound like me." They both chuckled, but the tone softened as he added, "You'd be proud of them, Amara. They don't just want jobs, they want meaning." She nodded slowly. "That's the real change, isn't it? When people stop asking for power and start asking for purpose." Marcus smiled warmly. "You just gave me my closing line." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Gregory Kane was standing at a podium of his own, a modest one, at a local community center. He now spoke regularly to students about ethics, resilience, and rebuilding. His name rarely appeared in headlines anymore, but maybe that was the point. His work wasn't for attention, it was for atonement. Behind him hung a banner that read, "Every story deserves a rewrite." He began, "When I was your age, I thought integrity was something you showed other people. But I learned it's what you show yourself, when no one's watching. That lesson cost me more than money, but it gave me back my peace." A hand raised in the audience. "Do you ever think about what you did?" a student asked, not with malice, but curiosity. Gregory nodded. "Every day, and that's how I make sure I never repeat it." The crowd applauded softly. When the session ended, a young man approached him shyly. "Sir, I'm on scholarship from the Hill Initiative. If not for that, I wouldn't even be here." Gregory's throat tightened. "Then don't waste it," he said quietly. "Learn, then lift someone else when it's your turn." As the student walked away, Gregory looked up at the banner again. "Every story deserves a rewrite." This time, it didn't feel like a slogan. It felt like truth. Back at the company, Elias prepared for a board visit to one of their new community branches. The plane ticket sat on his desk, but his mind drifted to the photo beside it, a candid shot of Amara and Lila from last year's scholarship ceremony. He smiled at the memory. Lila had stood on stage that day to introduce her mother, wearing a tiny blazer and shoes a size too big. "My mom says leadership isn't about being in charge," she had said. "It's about taking care of the people you love." That line had gone viral on social media, but to Elias, it wasn't just a quote. It was an anchor. He picked up the phone and called Amara's office. "Lunch?" he asked when she answered. She hesitated. "You know I have 3 back-to-back meetings, right?" "Yes," he said. "That's why I'm kidnapping you between them." Amara laughed. "Fine, but only if there's coffee involved." "Always," Elias replied. They met at a small cafe across from the park, a place that didn't care about titles, where businessmen and bus drivers shared the same chipped mugs, the kind of place where humility felt at home. They sat by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. For a while, they didn't talk about work. They talked about Lila's new hobby, painting, Marcus's class stories, and even Gregory's latest volunteer projects. "I heard he's helping design mentorship curriculums now," Elias said. Amara nodded. "Yes, he sends me updates. He's different, not trying to prove anything anymore." Elias stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "It's strange, isn't it? How the same house that once broke people apart is now the reason they're all connected." Amara smiled. "Maybe that's how healing works. You can't erase the place of pain. You transform it." He nodded, watching her reflection in the window. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she said quietly, "but it's worth it." They shared a quiet moment, the kind that doesn't need words. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle, and the world felt freshly washed. That evening, back at the Hill Initiative's downtown center, Amara walked through the new training room, bright walls, clean tables, laptops waiting for tomorrow's class. She touched one desk lightly, almost as if blessing it. A volunteer entered, carrying a box of new supplies. "Director Hill," she said, "I didn't expect you to still be here." Amara smiled. "You'll learn soon. Hope likes company." As the volunteer left, Amara stood alone in the room, surrounded by the quiet promise of tomorrow. On the wall above the whiteboard hung a framed quote from her first speech. "We can't control how fast the seeds grow, but we can keep the soil kind." She ran her fingers over the glass, whispering, "Keep growing." Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, painting the pavement gold. Across the city, people closed their laptops, locked their stores, tucked their children into bed. Somewhere, a bus driver smiled at a kind word. A student studied a little longer. A worker chose compassion over complaint. They didn't know they were part of a larger story, but they were. They were the ripple, ordinary acts echoing from one woman's courage, one child's honesty, one man's repentance. And in the quiet hum of the night, the ripples met and folded into each other, turning into something larger than all of them combined. A legacy that would outlive the names attached to it. The air was different that morning, brighter somehow, though the sky was still gray. It wasn't the weather that had changed, but the feeling. The kind of calm that comes after a long, hard season, when everyone finally exhales at once. At the Monroe estate, preparations were underway for a quiet ceremony. The Hill Initiative was celebrating its 2nd anniversary, and for the first time, the event would be hosted not in a boardroom or a hall, but here, on the very grounds where it all began. The same marble floors that once echoed with accusation would now carry the sound of laughter. The same garden where fear had once taken root would now bloom with life. Amara Hill stood by the fountain in the courtyard, watching volunteers string soft lights between the trees. The scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass lingered in the air. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory of the past drift through her. The shouting, the disbelief, the heartbreak. All of it still lived somewhere inside her, but quieter now, softened by time and purpose. Lila ran across the garden, her shoes kicking up little sprays of dew. "Mama, look," she called, holding up a folded paper with a drawing. "It's for the new time capsule." Amara knelt, smiling. "What did you draw this time?" Lila unfolded the paper proudly. It was a picture of the old mansion, but instead of gray walls and shadows, she had drawn it glowing, surrounded by people smiling beneath a sky full of stars. Amara's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, baby." Lila grinned. "It's what it looks like now." Inside the house, Elias Monroe stood by, the grand staircase, straightening his tie. Marcus Shaw leaned nearby, half amused. "You nervous?" Marcus teased. Elias chuckled. "Less nervous, more aware." "Of what?" Elias looked up toward the chandelier, its light scattering like fragments of memory. "That everything we're standing in could have been ashes if not for them." Marcus smiled. "Then maybe this isn't a ceremony. It's a resurrection." Elias nodded. "And we owe it to the people who believed in decency when I didn't." The ceremony began at noon. Chairs were set up in the garden, with a small stage beneath the shade of an old oak. The crowd was mixed. Employees, community partners, scholarship recipients, even families from nearby neighborhoods. At the front row sat Gregory Kane, quiet and attentive, next to his mother, Victoria Kane. Her once imposing posture had softened. She looked older but kinder. Elias stepped onto the stage first. The murmur of voices stilled. 2 years ago, he began, this place witnessed one of the darkest moments of my life. I thought I had built something great, only to realize it was hollow. But then, light found its way in, through honesty, through courage, through people who refused to stay silent. He turned slightly toward Amara, who sat near the stage, eyes calm, hands folded. "That's why we're here," he continued. "Not to celebrate success, but to remember the cost of forgetting our humanity, and to promise we'll never forget again." Applause followed, not loud, but heartfelt. The kind of sound that feels like agreement rather than noise. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she walked slowly to the podium. The crowd quieted again, instinctively sensing that this was the moment the day had been waiting for. "Every story begins somewhere," she said softly. "Ours began with a mistake, but it didn't end there. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come to destroy, it comes to rebuild." She looked out at the audience, her gaze resting on Gregory for a moment. He nodded, eyes glistening. Amara continued, "I used to think forgiveness meant weakness, but I've learned it's strength in disguise. It's what lets us walk forward without carrying the weight of what broke us." She paused, her voice steady and warm. "When I think of how far we've come, I don't see a company or a program. I see a community. I see a child who taught a lesson grown-ups needed to learn. I see a man who admitted fault when it could have ruined him. I see every single person who chose integrity over comfort." Her eyes found Elias in the crowd. "And I see a leader who finally understood that power isn't what you hold. It's what you give." Elias bowed his head slightly. Amara smiled faintly. So today, when we bury this time capsule, we're not hiding the past. We're planting it. Because good things grow from truth if we're brave enough to tend them. The applause that followed was gentle, rising like a wave and falling again into peace. After the speeches, the group gathered near the garden fountain. A small box made of oak sat beside a freshly dug space in the soil. Inside it were letters from employees, drawings from children, and one gold cufflink engraved with the initials G.K. Gregory placed it carefully into the box. "For memory," he said quietly. Amara smiled at him. "For growth," she corrected kindly. Together, they lowered the box into the earth. Lila dropped her folded drawing on top, whispering, "So the house remembers to stay happy." Everyone smiled. When the last bit of soil was patted down, the sunlight broke fully through the clouds, washing the garden in gold. Later that evening, when the guests had left and the garden lights twinkled under dusk, Elias and Amara stood by the fountain. The sound of water filled the quiet. "It's strange," Elias said. "For the first time, this place doesn't feel heavy anymore." "That's because it isn't," Amara said. "It's forgiven." He looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And you? Have you forgiven yourself too?" She paused. "Almost." Then she laughed softly. "Maybe when Lila stops reminding me to breathe." Elias chuckled. "She reminds me too." They stood there for a long moment, listening to the gentle rhythm of the fountain. The same house that once divided them now stood as proof that change, when rooted in truth, could outlast even the deepest wounds. Inside, Marcus placed the last of the event folders into a drawer. As he turned off the lights, he paused by a framed photo on the wall, one from the early days of the Hill Initiative. Amara, Elias, Lila, and dozens of smiling faces stood together beneath a banner that read, "Every voice matters." He smiled to himself and whispered, "Not bad for a beginning." That night, Amara tucked Lila into bed. The girl was already half asleep, her voice small and drowsy. "Mama." "Yes, baby?" "Do you think stories ever really end?" Amara brushed a hand through her daughter's hair. "No," she whispered. "They just rest until someone else needs them." Lila smiled in her sleep. Amara looked out the window, where the moonlight painted the room silver. Somewhere outside, the new garden shimmered faintly, the planted time capsule resting beneath its roots, waiting quietly for the next hands to find it. And in that stillness, she understood. What began as a test of honesty had become something far bigger, a promise that kindness, once planted, never stops growing. Morning sunlight crept across the city, slow and deliberate, spilling through the wide windows of the Hill household. It touched the polished picture frames on the wall, the books stacked neatly on the coffee table, and finally rested on the small plant sitting near the window. The same fern Elias had given Amara years ago. Its leaves had grown wide, green, and steady. Like everything else in her life, it had survived because she refused to stop tending it. Amara stood nearby, sipping tea from her favorite chipped mug. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic outside and the soft ticking of the kitchen clock. She looked over at Lila, now taller, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail as she packed her backpack for school. "Did you finish your essay?" Amara asked gently. Lila groaned. "Almost. It's about what I want to be when I grow up." Amara smiled. "And?" "I can't decide," Lila said, zipping her bag. "One day I want to be a lawyer. Then I think maybe a teacher. Then maybe someone who just helps people, but I don't know what that's called." Amara chuckled softly. That's called being good, sweetheart. You don't need a title for it. Lila thought about that for a moment. Then maybe I'll do that. Outside, the streets were waking up. The smell of bread drifting from the bakery. The bus driver waving to familiar faces. And neighbors exchanging quiet greetings. The world felt softer than it once did. When Amara dropped Lila off at school, the girl turned before heading inside. "Mama, can you come to Career Day next month? My teacher said parents can talk about their jobs." "Of course," Amara said. "What should I talk about?" Lila grinned. "Tell them how you teach grown-ups to be nice." Amara laughed. "I'll try." Later that morning, she arrived at the Hill Initiative Center downtown. The walls were filled with photos of scholarship recipients and stories of people whose lives had changed. In one corner, a display showed a simple timeline of how it all began, with one act of honesty and a chain of courage that followed. As Amara walked down the hallway, Marcus Shaw appeared from his office holding a cup of coffee. "Morning, Director Hill," he said, a teasing lilt in his voice. She rolled her eyes playfully. "I told you not to call me that." "It's in my contract," he replied. "You earned it, remember?" Amara smiled, shaking her head. "You never quit, do you?" "Not until you do," Marcus said. They shared a small laugh before heading into the conference room, where a few new team members were waiting for orientation. Amara stood at the front, her voice calm, her presence effortless. "Before we start," she said, "I want you to remember something. We don't fix people here. We remind them they were never broken." The newcomers listened closely, eyes bright. She continued, "If you do your job right, no one will remember your name, but they'll remember how they felt when you believed in them. That's the kind of legacy that lasts." Marcus caught her eye and nodded quietly, proud. Meanwhile, across the city, Elias Monroe was walking through the construction site of a new Monroe Industries campus. The foundation was almost complete, and on the fence surrounding the area, a large banner displayed the words, "Coming soon, Monroe Community Workspace, a place for every voice." Elias stepped over a puddle of rainwater and smiled faintly. The sound of hammers and drills reminded him of his father's old workshop. Hard work, precise, unglamorous. Beside him, a journalist asked, "Mr. Monroe, what inspired this new space?" Elias paused for a moment before replying, "The belief that buildings shouldn't just reach upward, they should reach outward." The reporter smiled. "You've become quite the philosopher." He chuckled. "I've had good teachers." That evening, the city glowed under a lavender sky. Amara left work late, walking through the park instead of taking the main road. The air was cool, the kind that carries distant laughter and the smell of street food. She passed by a small bench near the fountain, the same bench where she once sat years ago after losing her job, holding Lila's tiny hand and wondering how she'd start again. She paused, letting the memory wash over her. But this time it didn't sting. It felt like visiting an old scar that no longer hurt. A group of children were playing nearby. One of them, a little girl with bright braids, dropped her ice cream cone. Before she could cry, her friend handed over his own. "You can have mine," he said simply. Amara smiled. There it was, the next generation learning kindness without being told to. She whispered, "That's the real proof we've done something right." At home, the night came quietly. Lila was sprawled on the living room floor, drawing. The cat purred near her feet. On the page, Amara noticed a familiar image. Lila was sketching the fountain at the old estate, surrounded by trees and stars, just like her drawing from years before. What are you drawing now? Amara asked. The house, Lila said. But this time it's not just glowing. It's alive, like it's breathing. Amara sat beside her. Why? Because everything good is alive, Mama, even memories. Amara smiled, her heart full. That's beautiful, Lila. The girl yawned. Can you read me something before bed? Amara reached for the small, leather-bound journal she kept near the couch, the same one she'd been writing in for years. She flipped to the newest page and began to read softly. When we finally stop chasing redemption, we find something better. Peace. Peace doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up in quiet mornings, in gentle laughter, in forgiveness that doesn't need to be announced. I used to think survival was the goal. Now I know it's living with grace that matters. Lila's eyelids fluttered. That's nice, she murmured. Amara smiled, closing the journal. It's true. Later, when the house had gone still, Amara stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched before her, glimmering lights, soft wind, and the faint sound of a street musician playing the violin somewhere below. She closed her eyes, breathing in the night. Everything had changed, and yet the core of it all remained. The truth that started everything. That honesty, even when small, has power. It can rebuild homes. It can reshape companies. It can redeem lives. And sometimes it can save the world one quiet tomorrow at a time. She looked toward the horizon, where the first hint of dawn waited. Here's to tomorrow, she whispered. May it stay kind. The morning sun rose over the city, the light gentle and slow, as if even the sky knew this day deserved a quieter kind of arrival. It was the 5th anniversary of the Hill Initiative, and though there would be celebrations later, a luncheon, a small press event, an award presentation, the beginning of the day belonged to silence. Amara Hill woke early, as she always did, but she didn't reach for her phone or her planner. She simply sat at her window, a cup of tea warming her hands, watching the world soften into color. The plant beside her, the same fern that had followed her through every chapter, had grown tall enough to brush against the curtain. She ran her fingers gently along its leaves. You've done well, she whispered. We both have. From the next room came the faint sound of humming. Lila, now in her early teens, was already awake, packing her school bag while singing under her breath. Amara smiled. There was something profoundly comforting in that sound. It reminded her that life had a way of continuing, quietly and beautifully, even after storms. By mid-morning, the Monroe headquarters buzzed softly with excitement. The courtyard had been transformed into a celebration space. Flowers, banners, and small stands showcasing stories of the initiative's graduates. Elias Monroe walked among the displays, his posture relaxed but proud. Every photo he passed told a story. A woman who became a business owner, a man who returned to school, a teenager who found her first internship. He stopped by one particular board that showed Amara's original mission statement written in her careful handwriting. Fairness is not a gift from the powerful. It is the responsibility of those who have it. He read it slowly, the same way one might read a prayer. Still true, a voice said behind him. He turned to find Amara standing there, her expression calm but touched with warmth. She wore a simple cream dress and a small pin with the initiative's emblem, a circle of hands forming a sun. Elias smiled. You never stop working, do you? Neither do you, she replied. But at least today, we get to celebrate a little. He nodded toward the crowd beginning to gather. It's bigger than I imagined. It always was, she said softly. We just had to make space for it. The ceremony began just before noon. A hush fell over the courtyard as Amara stepped onto the stage. The light filtered gently through the trees, dappling her face and the wooden podium with shifting patterns. She began without notes. 5 years ago, she said, I stood here unsure of what the future held. I only knew what had to change. I didn't know if we could build a place where fairness wasn't a slogan, but a practice. But now, looking out at all of you, I realize we did. She gestured toward the crowd, graduates, staff, and families from across the city. Every one of you is proof that goodness, once planted, keeps growing even when no one's watching. That's what the Hill Initiative became, a garden that belongs to everyone. The audience listened in stillness. The wind caught a few strands of her hair, but she didn't flinch. I've learned something important, she continued. Forgiveness, justice, progress, they aren't separate things. They're steps of the same journey. Forgiveness heals the heart, justice repairs the world, and progress keeps both alive. She smiled gently. If you ever doubt whether one person can make a difference, remember this. Every great change begins with a moment of truth that someone refuses to ignore. Applause rippled through the courtyard, soft at first, then stronger. Elias stepped forward next, taking her place at the microphone. When Amara first told me her vision, he began, I thought she was talking about charity. I didn't realize she was talking about transformation. She didn't rebuild a company. She rebuilt its conscience. He paused, emotion thick in his voice. I used to think leadership was about control, but now I know it's about courage. The courage to admit when you're wrong and to change because someone showed you a better way. The applause this time was louder, rising like a wave. After the ceremony, as guests mingled, Amara found a quiet moment near the edge of the courtyard. Gregory Kane approached her, carrying a folder. His eyes were calm, lined with humility, earned through years of reflection. I wanted you to have this, he said, handing her the folder. Inside were photos from the community center he now helped run. Smiling faces, volunteers, classrooms full of people learning, rebuilding. Amara looked up, her voice gentle. It's beautiful. Gregory nodded. We named the scholarship wing after your daughter. Amara blinked. You didn't have to. I did, he interrupted softly, because she reminded us all what honesty looks like. For a long moment, they simply stood in shared silence. No resentment, no guilt, only understanding. Thank you, Gregory, Amara said, for keeping the story going. He smiled faintly. I think it's yours now. I'm just part of the next chapter. That evening, as the crowd dispersed and the sun melted into orange haze, Amara stayed behind for a moment. The courtyard was quiet again, the way it had been years ago on the night of the first apology, the first truth spoken aloud. Elias walked over, holding 2 paper cups of tea. You stayed, he said. I like watching the light change, she replied. It's a reminder that nothing golden stays forever, but it doesn't need to. It only needs to return. He handed her a cup. Do you ever think about how far we've come? All the time, she said. But I think more about how far others will go after us. They stood together, the soft wind carrying the scent of rain and blossoms. Elias looked out toward the city lights beginning to flicker on. You know, he said quietly, if you hadn't walked into this house years ago, none of this would have existed. Amara smiled. Then maybe the lesson is simple. Never underestimate the person holding the broom. He laughed softly. Fair point. As the night deepened, Amara returned home. Lila was asleep on the couch, her sketchbook open beside her. On the newest page was a drawing of a sun rising over a group of people, all holding hands. Underneath, in neat handwriting, she had written, "Light doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to whoever keeps it alive." Amara traced the words with her fingers. Her daughter didn't know it yet, but she had already become the next keeper of the light. She turned off the lamp and looked out the window. The city glowed, gentle, golden, alive. The light had traveled far since that first small act of honesty, and it would keep traveling, because that's what truth does. It moves quietly, endlessly, from one heart to the next, until even the darkest corners remember what warmth feels like.